Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The first time the instruments failed, I blamed the battery backup. I had been checking the weather station from my kitchen table because I was awake anyway. My name is Ellis Darrow, and I lived just outside Floyd, Virginia, in a small rental house at the end of Bent Laurel Road. I volunteered as a weather observer for the county emergency office and sent in daily readings whenever storms came through. It was not official, not like I worked for the National Weather Service, but I had a decent backyard setup, and the county liked having extra eyes in the hills. The station was mounted on a 10-foot pole behind the shed. It measured temperature, humidity, rainfall, wind speed, wind direction, pressure, and all that. I had a little console in the kitchen that showed the live readings, plus a laptop that logged everything. I checked it too often, honestly. My ex, Mallory, used to joke that I watched wind like other people watched sports. That week had been strange already. Warm days, cold nights, fog in the hollows every morning. The trees were just starting to leaf out, and everything smelled like wet soil and wood smoke. I had been up late because a line of storms had crossed West Virginia and was supposed to weaken before reaching us. It never really did. By midnight, we had thunder rolling around the ridges and rain hitting the windows hard enough to wake the dog next door. Around 4 in the morning, the storm had moved east, but I was still at the table with coffee gone cold beside me. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator and the little click the baseboard heater made now and then. At 4:17, the weather console went blank. Not dim. Blank. The laptop log stopped at the same second. The indoor thermometer on the wall beside the pantry, which was just a cheap digital thing from Walmart, went to all dashes. Even the old barometer my dad had given me, a round analog one with a needle, made a small tick and dropped all the way to the bottom like someone had tapped it. It lasted maybe 6 seconds. Then everything came back. The console restarted, beeped once, and showed normal readings. 51 degrees, 91% humidity, wind calm, pressure 29.83. The laptop filled in again and acted like nothing had happened, except there was a tiny gap in the data at 4:17. I sat there looking at it. I was tired, and the power had flickered earlier in the storm, so I checked the router, the microwave clock, the oven clock, and the little lamp by the couch. None of them had reset. My phone was charging. The kitchen light stayed on. It had only been the weather instruments. I wrote it down in my notebook because that was what I did with weird readings. 4:17 a.m., brief outage, all WX instruments, no house power loss. Then I went to bed. The second night, I stayed up on purpose. I told myself it was because I wanted to troubleshoot the equipment. That was partly true. The station had cost me more than I wanted to admit, and I didn't like not knowing what had happened. I replaced the batteries in the outdoor sensor array that afternoon. I checked the pole for loose wires even though it was wireless. I restarted the console, updated the logging software, and made sure the surge protector wasn't cracked or making that burnt smell cheap ones make when they're done. I also taped a note to the laptop screen that said 4:17. That evening was clear. No storms, no wind. The sky after sunset looked washed clean, with a thin crescent moon over the far pasture and stars bright enough to show through the bare branches. I stood outside before bed with a flashlight, staring at the pole behind the shed like it might explain itself. My neighbor, Owen Pike, called from his driveway, "You out there measuring ghosts?" I laughed and said, "Just bad wiring." Owen was in his 60s, retired from the phone company, and kept 3 dogs that barked at leaves. His house was about a quarter-mile down the road, but sounds carried weirdly in that hollow. We talked across the dark like that sometimes. He said if my equipment started predicting lottery numbers, I owed him half. By 2, I was tired enough that I almost gave up. I made more coffee and opened a book, but I kept reading the same paragraph. At 4:10, I was fully awake again. I had the kitchen lights off, so I could see the console clearly. The laptop screen showed live data lines crawling along. Everything was stable. 44 degrees, calm wind, pressure slowly rising. At 4:16, the dog next door started whining, not barking, whining, low and steady. Owen's dogs usually barked like they hated the entire world, but this sounded different. It came through the closed kitchen window as a thin, nervous sound. The weather station anemometer spun once. There was no wind. I could see the little cups on the pole through the window because I had the porch light on. They turned one clean rotation, stopped, then reversed half a turn. I leaned closer to the glass. The laptop clock clicked to 4:17. Everything failed. The console went blank. The laptop stopped drawing lines. The indoor digital thermometer went to dashes. My dad's barometer needle dropped with that same little tick. This time I also watched the compass on my phone. I had opened the app because I'd read that some sensor glitches could come from interference. I don't know why I thought a phone compass would tell me anything useful, but I had it on the table. At 4:17, the compass needle started spinning, not swinging. Spinning in a slow circle, smooth and steady, like a hand on a clock. It made 2 full rotations before stopping at north again. The outage lasted longer this time, maybe 12 seconds. When the instruments came back, the console showed impossible readings for one moment. Temperature, 88. Humidity, 0. Wind, 43 miles per hour. Rainfall, 6.12 inches. Then the numbers corrected themselves one by one. Outside, Owen's dogs went silent. That bothered me more than the whining. I waited at the table until my hands stopped shaking. Then I went outside with my flashlight. The air had changed. It was colder than it had been 5 minutes earlier, and it smelled faintly metallic, like the smell after a spark from jumper cables. The grass glittered with dew in the flashlight beam. The shed, the pole, the rain gauge, the little gravel path all looked normal. I walked to the weather station and touched the pole. It was vibrating. Barely. I might not have noticed if I hadn't had my palm flat against it. A soft tremor, like a refrigerator running on the other side of a wall. The anemometer cups were still. The wind vane pointed northeast. Then the rain gauge clicked. It had not rained that night. There were no clouds. The little seesaw bucket inside the gauge tipped once, making the soft plastic click I knew from wet days. The console inside beeped through the kitchen window. I went back in and looked. It had recorded 0.01 inches of rain at 4:19. I checked the gauge in the morning. Bone dry. Not a drop in it. I did not sleep much after that. The third night, I asked my friend Priya to come over, but she had an early shift at the hospital and thought I was being dramatic in a gentle way. She told me to set up a camera if I wanted proof. So I did. I had an old trail camera from when I thought raccoons were getting into the compost. I strapped it to a fence post facing the shed and the weather pole. I set my phone on a tripod inside the kitchen, pointing at the console, the laptop, and the wall thermometer. I also put my dad's barometer on the table so it was in frame. Then I took a second cheap thermometer from the bathroom and set it beside them just to see if it would fail too. I felt ridiculous while I was setting it all up. At the same time, I kept looking toward the tree line. Behind my shed, the yard sloped down toward a shallow creek and then rose into thick woods, mostly poplar, oak, and pine. The ridge behind those woods blocked the eastern sky. At night, that tree line was a flat black wall unless the moon was high. That evening, there was no moon. Clouds had moved in after sunset, but they were high and thin. The forecast said no rain. It was cold enough that I wore my old flannel jacket in the house and kept the kitchen window cracked because I wanted to hear outside. Owen called around 9 to ask if my ghost machine had acted up again. I told him it had failed at the same time 2 nights in a row. He was quiet for a second, then said, 4:17? I didn't like the way he said it. How'd you know? My radio clock in the garage went dumb yesterday morning, he said. I noticed because I was up letting the dogs out. It reset to 4:17 and stayed there until I unplugged it. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think it mattered. Did anything else happen? He coughed once, the way people do when they're about to lie or decide not to. Dogs wouldn't leave the porch. I asked if he had seen anything. No, he said too quickly. Then, after a few seconds, there was some light back in the woods, maybe. Thought it was hunters. At 4 in the morning? Yeah, he said. That's why I didn't go looking. He offered to stay awake and watch from his side. I said he didn't have to, but he said he probably wouldn't sleep anyway. That did not comfort me. By 3:30, I had the kitchen set up like a tiny control room. Laptop logging, console on, phone recording, notebook open, coffee, flashlight, boots by the door. I had even taken the batteries out of the smoke detector in the hallway because it chirped randomly and I didn't want to confuse myself. At 4, the house felt too quiet. At 4:08, my ears popped. Not painfully, just the small pressure shift you get driving over a mountain. I swallowed and looked at the barometer. It hadn't moved. At 4:12, the wind vane outside turned west. No wind reading appeared. 0 MPR. The vane just rotated on its little post until it pointed exactly west and held there. Then the anemometer cups began to move. Slowly at first. They turned one rotation, stopped, turned again, then picked up speed until they were spinning like there was a steady breeze. The trees did not move. The grass did not move. The cracked window curtain did not move. The console still said wind 0. I whispered, "Come on." I don't know who I meant. At 4:15, Owen's dog started whining again. This time I heard something under it. A tone. It was so low I felt it more than heard it. The floorboards under my chair seemed to carry it. The coffee in my mug showed tiny rings, not ripples exactly, just a faint trembling at the surface. I stood up. The trail camera outside flashed once. It should not have flashed. I had set it to infrared because I didn't want visible light messing with anything. But through the kitchen window, I saw a quick white blink from the fence post. Then the porch light went out. The kitchen light stayed on. The laptop stayed on. Only the porch light died, and the yard beyond the window dropped into darkness, except for the weak shine from my kitchen. At 4:16, the tree line lit up. Not like sunrise, not like headlights. A soft white brightness appeared above the trees to the east, just over the ridge, maybe a little to the right of the shed. It was not bright enough to cast shadows. It didn't light the ground or the shed wall or the pole. The grass stayed dark, but the light itself was clearly there, hanging above the trees. I went cold all at once. It was shaped like a short line at first, horizontal, wider than the shed. Then it thickened into a smooth oval. It had edges I could see but could not focus on. If I looked straight at it, it seemed flat. If I looked slightly away, it seemed rounded and large, much larger than it should have been. It made no sound. The tone was still there, but I could not say it came from the light. It felt like it came from everything. The laptop clock changed to 4:17. All the instruments failed. The console went black. The wall thermometer showed dashes. The bathroom thermometer did too. My dad's barometer needle dropped so fast it tapped the bottom of the dial. The laptop kept recording video, but the logging software froze on the line. 04 Tim name. My phone screen went dark, even though it had been recording. Outside, the light held over the tree line. It did not hover like a helicopter or drift like a balloon. It just stayed in the same place, silent and steady, about where the ridge should have blocked anything beyond it. It was white without glare. I could look at it without squinting, but I knew it was bright because nothing else in that dark yard had any business being visible. The anemometer cups stopped. The wind vane began to turn. It rotated from west to north, north to east, east to south, and kept going. 1 full turn. 2, faster each time. Then it stopped pointing straight at the light. The rain gauge clicked. Once. Then again. Then a third time. No rain fell. I backed away from the window until I hit the kitchen counter. The refrigerator stopped humming. The house was now completely silent, except for the tone and the soft clicks from the rain gauge outside. Click. Pause. 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 Click. I remember thinking I should look at the clock, but the laptop was frozen, my phone was dark, and the microwave clock had gone blank, even though it had not blanked the first 2 nights. The only thing still moving was the second hand on the little analog kitchen clock above the sink. It reached the 4, then stopped. The light over the trees changed. A small darker spot appeared in the middle of it. Not a shadow, exactly. More like a hole in the white. Then 2 more spots appeared, making a loose triangle. They were small compared to the whole thing, but I could see them clearly because everything else was so still. I told myself they were branches blocking part of it, but the light was above the trees, and the spots stayed in the same place while the bare branches below shifted slightly against the sky. Then the spots moved. They slid apart, slowly, like something inside the light was turning. The oval did not move, but those three darker points shifted positions. I stood there with my hand on the counter, unable to look away. The kitchen window fogged from the outside. That made no sense, but I watched it happen. The glass clouded over in a thin gray film, starting at the edges and creeping inward. Then three clear circles appeared in the fog, each about the size of a $50, arranged in a triangle. They were at my eye level. I stepped sideways. The circles did not follow me. They stayed in the glass, looking out at the yard or looking in at me. I hated that thought so much I turned away from the window. The back door handle moved. It didn't rattle. It turned down slowly until the latch clicked, then returned to place. I had locked the door earlier. I could see the little deadbolt knob turned horizontal. The door stayed shut. The handle moved again. Down. Click. Up. I picked up the flashlight from the table because it was the closest thing to a weapon, then felt stupid for holding a flashlight. My real tools were in the shed. My phone was dead. Owen was a quarter-mile away. I was alone in a kitchen with dead weather instruments and a silent light over the woods. The low tone pulsed once. I felt it in my chest. Every instrument came back on at the same time. The console beeped so loudly I flinched. The laptop unfroze. The thermometers showed numbers again. The microwave clock blinked 12. The refrigerator started with a clunk. The kitchen light flickered but stayed on. Outside, the white light was still there. That was worse than if it had vanished with the outage. The console showed 4:17, but the seconds weren't moving. The laptop clock said 4:17. The wall clock above the sink still had its second hand stuck on the 4. For a moment I thought time itself had jammed. Then the console jumped to 4:19. The laptop jumped to 4:19. The wall clock's second hand started ticking again, but the minute hand had moved forward 2 minutes. I looked back outside. The light began to drift left along the tree line. Not fast, not like it was leaving in a hurry. It moved behind the highest branches without lighting them, sliding silently over the ridge. As it moved, the tone faded. The white softened. The three dark spots inside it lined up for a second, one above the other, then spread apart again. Owen called. My phone was on the table, screen still black, but it rang. Not my normal ringtone, just a plain old telephone ring, loud and sharp. I picked it up. The screen stayed black. I said, "Hello?" Owen's voice came through thin and far away. "You seeing that?" "Yes, I'm on my porch." "Go inside. I can't move." The way he said it made my mouth go dry. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm standing here and I'm telling my legs to go, and they aren't." I looked toward his house, but trees blocked the road. I could only see the light above my own tree line, moving slowly left. "Owen," I said, "hang up and call 911. He made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "Phone says 4:17, he said. Then the call cut off. The light stopped moving. It hung above a gap in the ridge where a logging trail ran over to the next valley. I had walked there once years earlier, and never again because the trail was full of ticks and old beer cans. The oval seemed larger now, or closer. I couldn't tell which. For the first time, the ground under it changed. The treetops did not light up, but the fog in the hollow below them became visible. I hadn't known there was fog until then. It appeared as a pale sheet between the trunks, very low to the ground. It moved upward in narrow columns, like smoke in reverse, straight up toward the light. No wind moved the branches. The rain gauge clicked again. The console recorded rainfall 0.04, then 0.05, then 0.06. Each click landed exactly with a new number. Outside, the gauge was dry under the porch light's dead reach. I could see its outline on the pole. Nothing was hitting it. I decided to leave. I don't remember making that decision in a brave way. My body just moved. I grabbed my keys, shoved my feet into boots, took my coat from the chair, and went to the front door instead of the back. The front faced the road, away from the light. I thought if I got to the truck, I could drive to Owen's or into town or anywhere with other people. The front door opened halfway, then stopped. The chain lock was on. I never used the chain lock. It had been painted over by the landlord before I moved in. I had tried it once and couldn't even get it to slide. Now it was stretched tight across the gap, shiny where the paint had cracked off around it. Through the narrow opening, I could see the front yard and the gravel drive. My truck headlights were on. I had not turned them on. The truck was parked by the mailboxes, facing the house, empty and dark inside, except for the headlights shining at the porch. The beams did not look normal. They were dim and white, like the battery was nearly dead, but both were on. Beyond the truck across the road, I saw a shape near the ditch. Not a person. Not clear enough to be anything. A darker patch standing upright in front of the trees. It was thin and still. As soon as I focused on it, the truck lights flickered, and the shape was gone. I shut the door and locked it. The kitchen console beeped again. When I went back, the white light had started to shrink. It became a shorter oval, then a line, then a small white point above the trees. The tone faded until I could hear my own breathing and the fridge and the faint ticking of the wall clock. The point went out. Everything outside stayed dark. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. The console showed 4:24. The laptop log had a 7-minute gap, but the phone video later showed only black for that entire period, with audio missing. The trail camera had taken 43 photos, all completely white, except for the last one, which showed my yard from the fence post at 4:24 with the weather pole and shed exactly where they should be. I called Owen when my phone screen finally came back. He answered after one ring. He was inside his house. He didn't remember walking back in. His dogs were under the dining table and wouldn't come out. He said the clock on his stove was blinking 12, but the old radio clock in his garage said 4:17 again and would not change. I asked if he had seen anything in the road. He didn't answer for a while. Then he said, "There were 3 of them by your mailbox." I sat down at the kitchen table because my knees felt unreliable. "What do you mean 3? "Just shadows," he said. "Maybe trees." "I don't know. I don't want to talk about it right now." At sunrise, I went outside. The air smelled normal. Wet grass, dirt, distant cows from the pasture over the hill. Birds were loud in the trees like they were making up for lost time. The porch light worked when I flipped the switch. My truck started on the first try, though both headlights had been on long enough that they should have drained the battery. The weather station looked fine at first. Then I saw the rain gauge. It was full of dust, not dirt from the yard. Fine, pale gray dust, like ash, sitting in the collection funnel and coating the little tipping bucket inside. I touched it with one finger. It clung to my skin and had no smell. The anemometer cups were turned inward. That is hard to explain unless you have seen one. The 3 little cups should face the same direction around the center, open sides catching wind. Mine looked like each cup had been twisted toward the pole, bent without breaking, as if they had softened for a moment and then hardened in the wrong position. The wind vane still pointed toward the ridge. I walked to the kitchen window from outside. The 3 clear circles were there in the fogged film, though the glass had mostly dried. At eye level, arranged in a triangle. When I breathed on the glass, the fog spread around them, but not over them. Owen came over around 7. He looked older than he had the day before. He didn't bring coffee or make any jokes. He stood in the yard with his hands in his jacket pockets and stared at the ridge. We checked the mailbox because of what he had said. There were 3 narrow marks in the gravel beside it, each about an inch wide and maybe 3 feet apart. Not footprints, not tire tracks. More like something had pressed straight down and left clean holes through the gravel to the packed dirt underneath. Owen said, "I'm not reporting anything." I said, "Me neither." I did send the equipment logs to the county, but I left out most of it. I wrote that the station had suffered repeated sensor failures at 4:17 a.m. over 3 consecutive nights, and that the anemometer had been damaged during the final event. The emergency manager, Carlin Nguyen, called me that afternoon and asked if there had been lightning. I said no. She asked if there had been wind. I said no. She sighed and said she would mark it as equipment malfunction unless I wanted to file something more detailed. I told her malfunction was fine. That night, I slept at Priya's apartment in town. I brought my laptop and the phone video, but we couldn't get anything useful from them. The 7 minutes from 4:17 to 4:24 were just black silence, not muted. Silent, like the microphone had never existed. Priya watched the clip twice, then closed the laptop and said she didn't want to see it again. When I went home the next day, the pale dust in the rain gauge was gone. I hadn't cleaned it. Owen hadn't touched it. The funnel was clean and dry. The bent anemometer cups were still ruined, though. I had to order a replacement. For a while, I kept waking up before 4:17. Not every night, but enough. I would lie there in the dark, waiting for the console to beep, or the porch light to go out, or the handle on the back door to turn. Most nights, nothing happened. 3 weeks later, I found a new line in the laptop log. It was not in the weather software. It was in a plain text backup file I didn't remember creating, saved in the station folder. The file had one entry for each of the 3 nights. Eke, no data, no data, no data. Observer present, I deleted the file. The next morning, it was back. I was lying on top of the quilt with my socks still on because the cabin heater made the room too warm, and I kept telling myself I was going to get up and turn it down. The cabin belonged to my Uncle Ray, though he called it a cabin in the same way people call a cracked plastic chair patio furniture. It was really just a small one-bedroom place about 40 minutes outside Ely, Minnesota, tucked back off a logging road near Birch Lake. It had pine walls, a metal roof, a wood stove nobody trusted, and a propane heater that clicked and sighed all night, like it was irritated. I had gone up there alone for 3 nights in October to finish paperwork for a licensing exam. That was the official reason. The real reason was that my apartment in Duluth had become too loud after my breakup with Nora, and I wanted to be somewhere where nobody could stop by, text me to meet up, or ask how I was doing. My name is Aaron Klein. I was 32 at the time, and I worked as a building inspector. I was not outdoorsy in any serious way. I could start a fire if I had dry kindling and YouTube, and that was about it. Ray gave me the key, a list of things that didn't work, and a warning not to leave trash outside unless I wanted raccoons in the porch. The first night was normal, cold, clear, quiet. Too quiet at first, then nice once my brain stopped looking for traffic sounds. I studied at the kitchen table until my eyes burned, drank 2 beers, and listened to the trees creak in the wind. The cabin had no Wi-Fi. My phone got 1 bar if I stood by the front window and held it at chest height. I liked that more than I expected. The second night was when it happened. The day had been gray and damp. It rained a little in the afternoon, then cleared fast after sunset. By 9, the sky was sharp and black, and there were so many stars that it looked fake. I had gone outside earlier with a mug of coffee and stood on the porch just staring up through the trees. I could hear the lake somewhere downhill, not waves exactly, more like water shifting under the dock. Inside, I tried to study again, but I kept getting distracted. The cabin made small noises every few minutes. A pop from the wall, a tick in the heater, something sliding off the metal roof even though there was no snow. Around 10:30, I gave up. Brushed my teeth with water from a jug because Ray said the well pump had moods, and got into bed. The bedroom was at the back of the cabin. 1 window faced the lakeside, though you couldn't see the water from the bed because there were spruce trees between. The window had old plaid curtains, and the curtain rods sagged in the middle. I left them open because the room felt less boxed in that way. From where I lay, I could see a wedge of sky above the trees. I remember seeing Orion low through the glass, or what I thought was Orion. I'm not great with constellations. There were a few bright stars in a rough line and a bunch of smaller ones around them. I stared at them while the heater ticked. Then one of the stars went out. It didn't blink like a plane passing or a cloud moving over it. It just disappeared. A small white point was there, then it wasn't. I kept looking at the same spot, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I thought maybe my eyes had shifted, or maybe it had been a reflection from something inside the room. I raised my hand and waved it a little, blocking the lamp on the floor near the bed, even though the lamp was off. The room was dark, except for the green numbers on the little battery clock Ray kept on a crate. Then another star disappeared. This one was higher and a little to the left. Same thing. There, then gone. I sat up. The quilt slid off my legs, and the mattress springs made a flat little groan. I didn't feel scared yet. More curious and annoyed, like my brain was trying to solve something before it became a problem. A 3rd star went out, then a 4th. They were not all in a line. That was what made me stop breathing for a second. They vanished in a slow pattern from right to left, but not evenly. Like something with an uneven edge was moving across the patch of sky, covering them one by one. I got out of bed and went to the window. The cabin floor was cold enough to sting through my socks. I put one hand on the wall beside the window and leaned close to the glass. Outside, the trees were black and still, no wind, no clouds that I could see. The stars on one side of the window were normal. On the other side, there was a growing dark patch where they had disappeared. I whispered, "What is that?" I don't know why I whispered. There was nobody there to hear me. Another star vanished near the top of the window. Then the first one came back. Not suddenly all at once. The exact first star that had gone out reappeared. Then, maybe a second later, the second one came back. Then the third. Same order, same slow pace, about 30 seconds after they had disappeared. I stood there with my face close to the cold glass, watching the sky repair itself. The dark patch moved across the window. Stars disappeared along its front edge and returned along its back edge. It was like something huge and completely black was passing overhead without lights, without sound, without any outline except the stars it blocked. I could not tell how high it was. That was the worst part at first. It could have been just above the trees, or it could have been miles up. There was no shape I could see, only absence. It covered enough sky that I had to turn my head to follow it, but not enough to make sense of. Then the cabin went quiet. I didn't realize how much noise the place made until it stopped. The heater stopped clicking, the fridge in the kitchen stopped humming, the little battery clock on the crate still glowed, but the second hand on it, which usually made a faint plastic tick, was silent. Outside, even the lake sound was gone. I stayed at the window because moving away felt worse. The last star disappeared from the patch I could see. For a few seconds, the whole sky framed by the window was just black, not night black, a flat, heavy black with no depth. The trees below it looked normal, pointed tips against nothing. Then the stars began coming back from the right side. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. They returned in the same order they had vanished, like someone had covered a page with a hand and slid it away. When the final star came back, the heater clicked on again. The fridge hummed in the kitchen. The clock ticked. The whole cabin seemed to breathe back into normal life, and that was when I realized my hand hurt from gripping the window trim. I stepped away and almost tripped over my backpack. For a minute, I just stood in the bedroom in my socks and t-shirt, listening. My heart was beating hard, but the fear hadn't fully landed yet. I kept telling myself it had been a cloud, a weird small cloud, maybe fog, maybe my eyes, maybe some shadow from the trees moving across the window. But the trees hadn't moved. I went into the kitchen and turned on the light. It flickered 3 times before staying on. I opened the front door and stood in the doorway. Cold air came in, clean and sharp. The porch boards creaked under my weight. The yard was pale with moonlight, and the trees stood around it without moving. The sky above the clearing looked normal, full of stars. I stepped onto the porch. The porch light was off because Ray had told me it attracted moths and bats. I had to feel along the railing with one hand. The boards were damp from the afternoon rain. My breath showed in front of me. There was no sound from the woods. That didn't feel right. Even quiet woods have noise. Little crackles, branches rubbing, something. This felt held down. I looked straight up. For a second, I thought I saw a darker patch of sky moving behind the high branches, but as soon as I tried to focus on it, it was just regular dark sky again. Then a light appeared over the lake. Not in the sky, lower, maybe through the trees, maybe reflected off the water. A soft white glow pulsed once behind the spruce trunks, downhill from the cabin. It was not bright like a flashlight, not yellow like a cabin window, more like a car headlight diffused through fog, except there was no road down there and no fog. It pulsed again. I went back inside and locked the door. The lock was old and I had to jiggle it twice. I stood with my hands still on the knob, feeling ridiculous and very awake. The kitchen light hummed overhead. The papers I had been studying were spread across the table beside an empty bowl and Ray's chipped mug. My phone was on the table. I picked it up. No service, which was normal. The battery showed 18%. It had been at 64 when I plugged it into the portable charger before bed. The charger was still connected, but its little blue lights were off. I pressed the button on the charger. Nothing. I plugged the phone into the wall outlet near the counter. The screen didn't show charging. That was the second thing that made the fear feel real. I went around the cabin checking stupid things. Front door locked, back window latched, bathroom window painted shut. I took a steak knife from the drawer and put it on the table, then felt embarrassed, then left it there anyway. At 11:18, I heard something on the roof. Not footsteps, not a thump, more like a soft brushing sound, slow and steady, moving from the front of the cabin toward the back. It crossed the metal roof in a straight line, paused above the bedroom, then continued off the far edge. I looked up at the ceiling. The sound came again, but from the opposite direction. I told myself it was a branch scraping the roof. There were pines close to the cabin. Wind could move them. Except there had been no wind a minute ago, and the scraping was too even. It sounded like a heavy sheet of fabric being pulled across metal. The kitchen light dimmed, not off, just lower, the way lights dip when a furnace starts, except the heater didn't start. It had gone quiet again. I backed into the corner by the fridge. The window over the sink faced the side yard. I had left the small curtain open. Through the glass, I could see part of the woodpile and the two black trash bins Ray kept bungeed shut. A shadow moved across the snowless ground. There wasn't snow, but the ground was pale with frost, so I could see it. The shadow crossed from left to right, slow, huge, and soft-edged. It darkened the woodpile, the bins, the side of my car, then slid away. Nothing made a sound. I pressed my back against the fridge and waited for something else to happen. The light outside the lake pulsed again, brighter this time. It reached the kitchen window as a faint wash that made the glass show my reflection. I looked tired and stupid, holding a steak knife by my thigh. Then my car alarm chirped once. Not a full alarm, just one short lock chirp from outside. My keys were on the counter. I could see them. The car chirped again. The lights flashed through the side window, orange once, then went dark. I stared at the keys. They didn't move. No button pressed under anything. They were just lying there on Ray's mail. I heard the locks on the car click. Then again, lock, unlock, lock. I walked to the window because I couldn't stop myself. My car was a blue Subaru Outback, parked beside the cabin under a leaning birch. The mirrors were folded out. The windows were dark. The parking lights flashed once more, and the locks clicked again. Behind the car, in the tree line, 3 small lights appeared. They were not high up, maybe shoulder height if a person had been standing there. They were white, but dull, arranged in a triangle. They didn't look like eyes. They looked more like reflections, except there was nothing shining directly at them, except the weak kitchen light through the window. The 3 lights stayed for a few seconds. Then they went out together. I stepped back so fast my hip hit the counter. I wanted to call someone. Ray, Nora, 911, anyone. The phone still had no service and still wouldn't charge. I lifted it toward the ceiling, toward the window, walked in a circle like an idiot. Nothing. That was when I noticed the clock on the stove. Ray had told me the stove clock didn't keep time and not to trust it. I hadn't paid attention to it all day. Now it showed 3:33. The battery clock in the bedroom said 11:21. My phone said 11:21. The stove clock blinked 3:33, steady and green. I unplugged the stove. The clock stayed on. I remember staring at the cord in my hand, then at the glowing numbers. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain each thing separately. I set the cord down and moved away from it. The roof sound came back. This time it was directly above the kitchen. Slow brushing. A pause. Then 3 light taps on the metal roof. Tap, tap, tap. I stood completely still. A few seconds later, 3 taps came from the bedroom window. Not hard, not urgent, just knuckle-light taps on glass. I did not go look. The taps came again. The cabin had no interior hallway, just a doorway from the kitchen living area into the bedroom. From where I stood, I could see the edge of the bed and a slice of the window. The curtain hung open. The glass reflected darkness. Then the stars in that slice of window began disappearing again, one by one. I watched from the kitchen doorway as the little points of light above the black trees went out in the same slow order. Right to left, uneven edge, smooth movement. Something overhead was passing again, or still there, circling back. My legs felt weak, so I sat down on the floor with my back against the lower cabinets. I put the knife beside me because holding it felt pointless. I kept my phone in both hands, waiting for service like that would fix everything. The room got warmer, not from the heater. That was still off. The air itself warmed in layers. My face got hot first, then my arms, then the floor under me. It smelled faintly like dust on a light bulb. The wood walls made small popping sounds. The phone screen turned on. It showed the camera app, though I hadn't opened it. The image on the screen was black. Then it adjusted, brightened, and showed the bedroom window from where I was sitting. At first I thought it was just filming what was in front of me. Then I saw myself in the image, not my reflection. Me. On the phone screen, I was standing at the bedroom window with one hand on the glass, looking outside, but I was sitting on the kitchen floor. I dropped the phone. It landed face up. The image shook, but it still showed the bedroom. The me on the screen turned slightly, not enough to show a face, just enough that I saw my own t-shirt and socks and the angle of my shoulders. Then the phone went black. I crawled away from it on my hands and heels until my back hit the far wall. The cabin was dark now, except for the stove clock still glowing 3:33 and the faint starlight through the windows. The kitchen bulb had gone out without making a sound. The fridge was off. The whole place had that dead electrical feeling. But the stove clock kept shining. Outside, something moved across the front porch. I saw it through the thin gap beside the door curtain. A dark shape blocked the stars in the pale yard for a second. Not a person standing there. More like a piece of the night sliding past. Too tall to be an animal. Too smooth to be branches. The porch board nearest the door creaked. Then another. Then nothing. I don't know how long I sat there. I know I kept checking the battery clock through the bedroom doorway because it was the only normal thing left. It moved from 11:21 to 11:22, then to 11:23. Time was passing, but it felt thick and slow. At 11:24, the stove clock changed. 3:33 became 11:24. The heater clicked, the fridge hummed, the kitchen light popped back on, too bright. Outside, wind moved through the trees all at once, like someone had released them. Branches rubbed the roof. The lake made its soft, shifting sound again. The cabin returned to normal so suddenly that I started shaking. I got up, grabbed my keys, my phone, and my boots. I didn't pack. I didn't turn off lights. I put on my coat over the t-shirt and shoved my feet into my boots without tying them. I opened the front door and ran to my car. The yard looked normal except for frost glittering in the headlights when I unlocked it. The car responded like nothing had been wrong. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The dashboard clock said 11:24. The road out was a narrow dirt track between trees, and I drove it too fast. Branches scraped both sides of the car. The headlights bounced over ruts and patches of wet leaves. I kept expecting something to step into the road, but nothing did. About halfway to the logging road, I had to stop. There was a tree across the track. It wasn't huge, maybe 6 inches thick, but it lay from ditch to ditch. Fresh break. Pale wood showing at one end. It had not been there when I drove in 2 days earlier. I sat there with the engine running, staring at it in the headlights, and laughed once because it felt so stupid and unfair. I got out with Ray's small axe from the back. My boots were untied and the laces dragged in the mud. I chopped at the smaller branches first, barely knowing what I was doing. Every sound seemed too loud. Axe on wood. My breath. The car engine. The trees around me. Then I noticed the stars ahead through the gap in the road. They were disappearing again. Far above the trees, beyond the windshield glare, stars went out one by one. Same order, same slow black movement. I stopped chopping. The axe hung in my hand. This time the dark patch moved from behind me toward the road ahead. The stars vanished above the treetops, then returned behind it after half a minute. Whatever it was, it passed over without sound, without wind, without even a pressure change I could feel. But the car headlights dimmed as it crossed. The engine stumbled. I whispered, "Not now." The thing overhead kept moving. The headlights came back up. The engine steadied. I dropped the axe, dragged the cut branches aside, and pushed the trunk enough with my shoulder to get one wheel over the edge of it. The Subaru scraped hard underneath as I forced it over. Something snapped under the car, but it kept moving. When I reached the logging road, my phone chimed. Service. 1 bar. I called Ray first because his number was at the top of recent calls. He answered in a groggy voice, and I said, "I'm leaving your cabin." He said, "What happened?" I said, "I don't know." He started asking questions, but the call dropped after 10 seconds. I did not call back. I drove. The logging road came out near a 2-lane highway by an old bait shop. There was a single orange light over the bait shop sign, and seeing it made me feel like I had reached civilization, even though the place was closed and the highway was empty. I pulled over under the light and sat there until my breathing slowed. The time on the car dash was 12:08. That didn't make sense. The drive from the cabin to the highway should have taken 15 minutes, maybe 20 with the tree. I had left at 11:24. I had lost at least 20 minutes somewhere, maybe more. I tried not to think about that too hard because I still had to drive back to town. I made it to Ely a little before 1 and got a room at a small motel with a blue sign and a woman at the desk who looked half asleep. She asked if I wanted 1 bed or 2. I said 1. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. In the room, I plugged in my phone. It turned on at 47%. There were no photos from that night. No video. The camera roll jumped from a picture of the lake I had taken that afternoon to a photo of a gas station receipt from the next morning. The call log showed the dropped call to Ray at 11:52, not 11:24. There were no other calls. I slept with the bathroom light on. In the morning, I drove back to the cabin with Ray. He insisted. He was annoyed at first because I had left the lights on and the door unlocked, and because he thought I had panicked over a bear or a tree falling. Then we got there and found the porch. There were 3 round marks on the metal roof above the bedroom, each about the size of a dinner plate. They weren't dense. They were clean circles where the brown pine needles and old roof grime had been cleared away, arranged in a triangle. Ray climbed up on a ladder and touched one. He said it was warm. It was 38 degrees outside. Inside, the stove clock was unplugged and blank. The battery clock in the bedroom had stopped at 11:24. The plaid curtains were still open. On the outside of the bedroom window, there were 3 small smudges in the dust, also in a triangle, right where the tapping had come from. Ray didn't joke after that. He helped me pack my things, and we left before noon. I never finished my exam paperwork up there. I never stayed in that cabin again. A month later, Ray called and said he had finally gone back to drain the lines before winter. He said everything was normal except for one thing. The tree I had driven over on the track was gone. Not cut up, not pushed aside, gone. The ditch grass on both sides was flat and brown in a perfect circle, and the road surface through the middle of it was dry, though it had rained all morning. He asked if I had moved the tree. I said no. He said I figured. That was all he said about it. I was halfway through the south end of my paper route when I saw the white thing over St. Bartholomew's Cemetery. This was back in March, before I quit delivering for the county paper. My name is Nolan Price, and I was 26 then. I had taken the route because my hours at the auto parts store got cut, and I needed something I could do before my regular shift. It paid badly, but it was quiet work. Most mornings I had the whole town to myself. The route started at 4:15 behind the Gazette office in Red Hook, New York. I picked up the bundles from a metal rack by the loading door, signed the sheet with a pen that never worked, and drove around in my old green Subaru with the passenger seat folded flat. I knew every porch light, every loose dog, every mailbox lid that froze shut, every old guy who came outside in a robe to ask why I was late when I was not late. That morning was cold but not snowy. It had rained the evening before, and everything had frozen into a thin skin by the time I started. The roads shone where my headlights hit them. The trees were bare, the lawns were stiff and silver, and the air had that damp smell that gets into your sleeves. I came down Mercer Road at about 5:08. I knew the time because I had just checked the dashboard clock after finishing the Briar Lane loop. St. Bartholomew's was on the left, behind an old stone wall and a line of leaning maple trees. The church itself was gone, knocked down in the 80s from what I'd heard, but the cemetery stayed. It was small, maybe 4 acres, set on a low rise with older graves at the top and newer ones down by the road. I had one subscriber on that stretch, a widow named Mrs. Bellamy, who lived in the white farmhouse across from the cemetery gates. Her paper went in the black tube under her mailbox. I slowed, like usual, reached over, and shoved the rolled paper out the passenger window. That was when I noticed it. At first, I thought the moon had come out from behind clouds. There was a white shape above the cemetery, just beyond the main gate, maybe over the oldest part of the grounds. It was not high. That was my first clear impression. It seemed to hang above the trees, but not by much. I stopped the car without meaning to. The object was bright white, but it did not shine on anything. That was the part my brain kept snagging on. It was clearly visible against the dark sky, brighter than the clouds, brighter than any star, but the headstones beneath it stayed black. The grass stayed black. The trunks of the maples did not catch any light. It looked almost like a white cutout placed in the air. It had no beam, no flicker, no blinking lights. It was not round exactly, more like a flattened oval, smooth at the edges, wider than it was tall. If I held my thumb up at arm's length, my thumb would have covered it. That made it hard to guess the size. It could have been the size of a car if it was low, or the size of a house if it was farther back. I rolled my window down farther. The morning was silent except for my car engine ticking and the soft air hiss from the heater vents. No drone sound, no engine, no buzzing. The object just sat there. I told myself it was a reflection on the windshield, so I leaned forward and moved my head side to side. It stayed in the same place. I turned the wipers on once. The blades scraped across the glass, smearing a thin line of frost melt, and the white object remained. Then the radio cut out. I usually listen to an AM sports station during the route because talk helped me stay awake. The host had been going on about the Knicks, and then his voice just flattened into a soft static. Not a loud burst, more like someone had turned him down and turned the emptiness up. I looked at the radio, tapped the preset button, then looked back at the cemetery. The object was still there. A porch light came on at Mrs. Bellamy's house. That made me feel better for maybe 2 seconds. A normal house light, a normal old woman probably making tea. I expected the object to look less strange with another light in the scene, but it didn't. It still sat over the cemetery, white and clean, not lighting the air around it. Then Mrs. Bellamy's porch light went off, not flickered, off. At the same moment, my heater fan slowed down. The dashboard lights dimmed. The Subaru engine stumbled once like it might stall, then caught itself. I put the car in drive. I didn't peel out or anything. I just let the car roll forward, very slowly. I kept looking at the object through the side window as I passed the cemetery wall. It didn't move. It didn't rotate. It didn't react to me in any way I could tell. When I reached the bend by the creek, the radio snapped back on mid-sentence. The host was saying, "And that's why you can't blame the bench for that one." Like, nothing had happened. I finished the rest of the route, but I kept thinking about the cemetery. The papers felt heavier. Every dark yard looked too still. I almost skipped the last dozen houses just to go home, but I needed the money and I knew complaints came in fast. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sky was turning blue behind the grocery store. I lived above a laundromat on Market Street, and my girlfriend at the time, Sadie, was still asleep when I came in. I didn't wake her. I took off my wet shoes, sat at the kitchen table, and searched my phone for weather balloons, drones, Venus, helicopters, anything. The problem was, the object had looked too low for a planet and too still for anything drifting. Also, weather balloons don't hover over local cemeteries at 5 in the morning without moving. I told Sadie about it when she got up. She listened while she poured cereal, then said maybe it was a security light on a crane or something. There's no construction there. Maybe the church had lights? There's no church. She looked at me over her bowl and said, not meanly, "You work at 4 in the morning. You're tired." That was fair. I was tired all the time then. So I let it go as much as I could. The next morning it was back. Same time, same road, same exact place. I had told myself I wouldn't slow down at the cemetery, but of course I did. I came over the little rise after Briar Lane with my mouth already dry, and there it was, hovering above the old headstones just past the gate. The same white flattened oval, the same strange brightness that did not light anything. I pulled to the shoulder across from Mrs. Bellamy's mailbox and put the car in park. My hands were cold inside my gloves. The dashboard clock said 5:08. That bothered me right away. I had seen it around 5:08 the day before. Paper routes are repetitive, but not down to the minute. Some mornings a bundle was late, or I dropped a paper under a parked car, or a dog blocked a driveway. I should have been a few minutes off. I took out my phone and opened the camera. The screen showed the cemetery, the stone wall, the black trees, and nothing in the sky. I looked over the phone. The white object was there. I looked back at the phone. Nothing. I moved the phone left and right. The camera saw the trees and the dark sky, but not the object. I switched to video. Still nothing. I took a picture anyway, then zoomed in. The object did not show up. That was when I started feeling like I should not be sitting there. The radio static came back. Softer this time, underneath the morning show. I could hear the host talking through it, but his words stretched and dipped like the signal was being pulled through water. Across the road, Mrs. Bellamy's porch light turned on, then off, then on again. Then the upstairs bedroom light turned on too, bright yellow behind lace curtains. I saw a shape pass behind the curtain. Mrs. Bellamy, I assumed. She stopped there, just a dark outline in the window, facing the cemetery. The object did not move. I pressed the gas and continued down the road. As I passed the gate, something tapped the passenger window. 3 little taps. I jerked so hard the car crossed the center line. There was no one outside the window. No branch close enough. No stone thrown up by a tire because I was barely moving and the road was clean. I didn't stop again until I reached the diner parking lot 2 miles away. I got out and looked at the passenger side. There were 3 clear circles in the damp film on the window, each about the size of a quarter, arranged in a triangle. They were not fingerprints. They looked like something warm had touched the cold glass and cleared the condensation. I wiped them with my sleeve. My sleeve came away dry. That morning, I told my boss, Renee. She ran distribution for the Gazette and had been doing newspaper work since before I was born. She was not easily impressed. I expected her to laugh or tell me to stop smoking before my route. Instead, she said, "St. Bart's?" I said, "Yeah." She looked toward the loading bay where 2 other drivers were arguing about a missed bundle. "Did it look white?" she asked. That made my back tighten. I asked what she meant. She shrugged too quickly. "People say things. It's an old cemetery." "What people?" "Old carriers, teenagers. Mrs. Bellamy called once years ago about lights." "What kind of lights?" Renee picked up a clipboard and pretended to read it. "I don't remember." She did remember. I could tell, but she wouldn't say more. I went home, slept badly for 3 hours, then drove to St. Bartholomew's in daylight. The cemetery looked small and harmless in the sun. The stone wall had gaps in it. The iron gate was rusted open. Most of the old headstones were tilted, with names worn down to partial letters. A few plastic flowers had blown against the fence. The grass was brown and flattened from winter. I walked to the spot where I thought the object had hovered. It was near the older section where the graves went back into the 1800s. There was a big maple tree there with a hollow at the base and a row of headstones so old they looked like broken teeth. Nothing was burned, nothing was crushed, no weird metal, no footprints, no circle in the grass. But it was warmer there. I don't mean summer warm. It was March, and the air had a bite everywhere else. But under that spot, the cold seemed weaker. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and felt warmth on my face, like standing near a window with sunlight through it. The sky was cloudy. There was no direct sun. I took a step back, cold. Step forward, warm. I did that 3 times before I felt stupid and stopped. Near the maple tree, there were 3 small holes in the ground. They were arranged in a triangle about 2 feet apart. Each one was round and narrow, like someone had pushed a broom handle into the soil. The dirt around them was not disturbed. No shoe prints nearby except mine. I crouched down and looked into one. I could not see the bottom. That bothered me because the hole was maybe an inch wide and the ground should have been packed and wet. I picked up a twig and pushed it in. It went down farther than the twig's length. I let go by mistake and it slid out of sight without making a sound. A car horn made me jump. Mrs. Bellamy was parked at the cemetery gate in an old silver Buick, watching me through the windshield. I walked over because pretending I hadn't seen her seemed worse. She rolled down her window halfway. She was probably in her late 70s, small, with white hair tucked under a knit hat. She looked tired, not frightened exactly, but worn down. "You deliver the papers," she said. Yes, ma'am. You saw it. I didn't answer fast enough. She nodded. Don't stand under where it sits. I looked back at the old graves. Do you know what it is? No. Has it happened before? She looked at the cemetery for a long moment. Not 2 mornings in a row. I asked how long she had lived across from it. 42 years. And you've seen that thing before? She rolled the window down another inch. Sometimes there's a light, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the dogs in the neighborhood all start up, and sometimes nothing will make a sound at all. What does it do? It waits. I wanted to ask what that meant, but her face made me stop. She said, "You shouldn't be parked there when it's above the stones." Then she rolled up the window and drove away. I didn't go back to the cemetery in daylight again. The 3rd morning, I considered calling out sick. I even got as far as typing Renee a text. But I needed the paycheck, and part of me wanted to prove it would not be there again. 2 mornings could be a coincidence, or exhaustion, or something I had misunderstood. 3 would be something else. It was foggy that morning. Not thick everywhere, just low patches sitting over the road and fields, the kind that makes headlights bounce back at you. The paper bundles were wet around the edges, and I cursed the loading crew while I stuffed them into plastic sleeves. I took the route slower than usual. I tried to delay the cemetery without making it obvious to myself. I double-checked addresses. I turned around for one paper I thought I had missed. I sat at a stop sign longer than needed. When I reached Mercer Road, the dashboard clock said 5:08. I pulled over before I could see the cemetery. For a few seconds, I just sat there with the engine running. Fog drifted in thin bands over the road. My radio was still working. The heater blew on my feet. Everything was normal if I didn't look left. Then the radio went to static. I looked. The white object was there. Same place, same height, same impossible dull brightness. The fog did not hide it. If anything, the fog made it clearer because the object stayed clean and sharp while everything else softened. This time, there was something underneath it. Not on the ground, hanging in the air between the object and the headstones. Thin vertical lines, barely visible, like rain falling from a cloud, except the air was dry and the lines did not reach the ground. They shimmered faintly, a pale gray against the dark trees. I whispered, "No," and put the car in reverse. The Subaru didn't move. The engine revved, but the car stayed still. I pressed harder, thinking the tires were caught in ice. Nothing. No spin, no slide, no movement at all. Then the car rolled forward. I had the gear in reverse, but it rolled forward at walking speed toward Mrs. Bellamy's mailbox and the cemetery gate. I hit the brake. The pedal felt normal, but the car did not stop. It kept creeping forward, slow and smooth, as if being pulled by a tow line. The radio static lowered into a hum. The headlights dimmed. I pulled the parking brake. The handle came up too easily, no resistance. The car kept moving. It stopped by itself across from the cemetery gate. The dashboard clock still said 5:08. The object hovered above the old stones. The pale vertical lines beneath it flickered in and out, not touching the ground. I could see the maple tree through them, but it looked slightly bent, like looking through heat over pavement. Across the road, Mrs. Bellamy's porch light came on. Then her front door opened. She stepped onto the porch in a long coat, holding something in her hand. A flashlight, maybe. She did not turn it on. She just stood there facing the cemetery. I wanted to yell at her to go back inside, but my window would not roll down. I pressed the button 3 times. The motor made no sound. The tapping came on the passenger window again. 3 taps. The marks appeared as I watched. 3 small circles forming in the fogged glass, arranged in a triangle. Nothing touched the window that I could see. Then 3 taps came from the windshield. Not outside exactly, more like within the glass. 3 little clicks at eye level and 3 clear dots appeared in the frost haze near the top center. I kept both hands on the wheel and stared straight ahead. The white object changed shape. Only slightly. The lower edge flattened more, and the whole thing seemed to turn, though I could not see any surface or sides. Its edges stayed soft and hard at the same time, which makes no sense, but that was how it looked. My eyes could see it, but they did not know how to hold on to it. The fog around the cemetery stopped moving. The patches on the road froze in place. Not frozen as ice. Frozen like a paused video. A curl of mist beside the gate held its shape without drifting. Another strip hung over the stone wall, perfectly still. My breath sounded too loud. Then I noticed the headstones. The old ones under the object were turning. At first I thought it was another trick of the fog. Then I saw one of the thin slate markers rotate a few inches in the ground, slow and smooth, like someone below it had twisted it. Another turned beside it, then another. All of them, under the white object, shifted to face the same direction. Not toward the road, not toward the church that wasn't there anymore, but slightly southeast, toward the dark field beyond Mrs. Bellamy's house. That was the moment I stopped trying to be brave. I started crying and saying, "Please let me go," over and over in this flat voice I barely recognized. Mrs. Bellamy raised her hand from the porch. Not waving, more like warning me to stay still. The object dimmed. It didn't get darker exactly. It became less present. The white faded toward the color of the fog, and the vertical lines beneath it thinned until they were almost gone. Then everything snapped back. The radio came on mid-ad, the heater fans surged, the headlights brightened. The car lurched backward because it was still in reverse, and I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked. The dashboard clock changed from 5:08 to 5:31. Mrs. Bellamy's porch was empty. The cemetery looked normal in the fog. The headstones were still. I put the car in drive and left. I didn't deliver the rest of Mercer Road. I went straight to the Gazette office and told Renee I was done. She didn't ask why. She just looked at my face, took the route sheet from my hand, and said, "Okay." I sat in the parking lot after that because I didn't trust myself to drive home yet. My phone had no missed calls, no messages, nothing showing a gap except the time. When I checked the photo I had taken the previous morning, it showed the cemetery empty, like I expected. But there was a white blur reflected faintly in my passenger window in the corner of the image, even though I had taken it pointing straight ahead. I went back to my apartment around 7. Sadie was awake and irritated because I had left without taking the trash down. I told her I quit the route. She asked what happened. I tried to explain, but I sounded crazy even to myself. When I mentioned Mrs. Bellamy, Sadie frowned. "The lady across from the cemetery?" "Yeah." "Nolan, she died." I thought she meant recently, like maybe overnight, and for a second I felt the floor drop out from under me. Sadie pulled up the local notices on her phone. Mrs. Elaine Bellamy had died 2 weeks earlier at a nursing home in Kingston. There was a small obituary with a photo from years before. Same woman, same sharp nose, same tired eyes. The farmhouse had been empty since then, Sadie said. She knew because her aunt worked at the pharmacy and heard everything. I drove past the farmhouse that afternoon, not alone. I made my friend Marcus come with me. He thought I was being dramatic, but he came because he owed me $20 and had nothing else to do. The house was empty. There were no curtains in the upstairs bedroom, no car in the driveway. A real estate lockbox hung from the front door. The porch light fixture had no bulb in it. I could see the empty socket from the road. Marcus said, "You sure this is the place?" I didn't answer. We walked across to the cemetery because he wanted to see the old stones. I didn't want to go in, but I also didn't want to stand by myself on the road. The headstones under the maple tree were different. I knew they were. I could not prove it because I hadn't photographed them before, but they were all angled in the same direction now. Southeast, slightly away from the road. Marcus said old stones lean however they lean, and maybe I was noticing a pattern because I wanted one. Then he found the holes. 3 narrow holes in the ground near the maple, arranged in a triangle. The ones I had seen the day before were still there, or new ones in the same place. Marcus pushed a stick into one. The stick went all the way down. He let go, and it vanished. He stopped smiling after that. We left without talking much. I didn't deliver papers again. I told people the hours were messing with me, which was true enough. I got more shifts at the auto parts store and eventually moved to a different apartment with Sadie, then moved out of that one when we broke up. A few months later, Marcus sent me a picture at 5:12 in the morning. He worked early at a bakery then and drove by St. Bartholomew's on his way in. The photo showed the cemetery in blue pre-dawn light, fog low over the road, the stone gate on the left. There was nothing above the graves. I texted, "Why did you send this?" He replied, "Look at the mailbox." I zoomed in. Across the road, Mrs. Bellamy's black mailbox stood in front of the empty farmhouse. The red flag was up, there was a rolled newspaper sticking halfway out of the tube underneath. The Gazette had stopped delivering to that address after she died. I asked Marcus if he put it there. He said no. Then he sent one more text. Clock in my truck says 5:08 and won't change. I pulled into the rest area because my right leg had started to cramp from holding the gas pedal in the same place for too long. It was a little after 3 in the morning, somewhere off I-84 in eastern Oregon, past Pendleton, but not yet to Ontario. I had been driving since Spokane. My sister Kendra had called me the night before, saying our dad was back in the hospital in Boise. And even though she said it wasn't an emergency, her voice had that tight sound that meant it probably was. I threw clothes in a bag, filled my old Toyota Camry at a station near my apartment, and left before I could talk myself into waiting until daylight. The drive had been boring in that unsafe way, where nothing happens for so long that your brain starts making little mistakes. I had caught myself drifting toward the rumble strip twice. I had eaten gas station peanuts for dinner. The radio had turned to static about 20 miles back, so I shut it off and drove with only the heater and the tires on the road for company. My name is Adrian Mercer. I was 37 then. I worked scheduling for a dental office, lived alone, and had no real reason to be on empty highways at 3 in the morning except family guilt and bad timing. The rest area sign came up out of the dark, blue, and reflective, and I took the exit without thinking much. The ramp curved down to a little parking lot tucked between low hills. There was a bathroom building with bright white lights, a few picnic tables, a vending machine that probably didn't work, and maybe 8 cars parked in scattered spots. A semi idled at the far end near the truck spaces. It was cold enough that the windshield had a crust around the edges. The temperature on my dash said 29 degrees. The sky was clear, and I remember seeing a lot of stars over the restroom roof, sharp and steady. No moon, or not enough moon to matter. The whole place had that frozen, quiet rest areas get at night, like every sound had been packed in cotton. I parked near the middle under one of the lamps, not too close to anyone. There was a dark blue Subaru 2 spaces over, a white pickup by the grass, a silver minivan near the bathrooms, and a little red hatchback with a bike rack on the back. Nobody was moving around. No doors opening, no people walking dogs, nothing. I turned the engine off and sat there for a second with my hands still on the wheel. The sudden quiet made my ears ring. The heater fan wound down. The engine ticked softly under the hood. Then I noticed the dew. Every car in the lot had a thin silver layer on it. Not frost exactly, but heavy dew, shining under the overhead lights. The Subaru's roof was wet. The pickup's hood was wet. The minivan windows were fogged and beaded. Even the red hatchback had droplets on the rear glass. My car was completely dry. At first, that didn't seem strange. I had just been driving 70 miles an hour, and the others had probably been parked for a while. Wind could have dried mine off. Engine heat could have kept it warmer. I knew enough to explain that part away. But when I stepped out, the cold hit me hard, and I saw the dew on the pavement too. The whole lot had a damp shine, like a thin, wet skin over the asphalt. My tires made dry little crunch sounds when I shifted my weight, and that made me look down. There was a dry patch around my car, a perfect one. Not a puddle shape, not just under the engine, not a rough outline from heat. A clean oval of dry pavement surrounded the Camry, maybe 2 feet out from the bumpers and doors. The edge was sharp enough that I could see where the wet asphalt began. It looked like someone had placed an invisible cover over my parking space before the dew settled. I stood there with my keys in my hand, staring at the ground. A truck on the interstate passed in the distance, just a low rush over the hill. I told myself I was tired. I had been driving for hours. I needed the bathroom, water, and maybe 5 minutes of walking around. That was all. I locked the car and heard the chirp bounce off the restroom building. The sound felt too loud. I walked toward the bathrooms, but after maybe 10 steps, I stopped and looked back. The Camry sat under the light, dusty silver, dry as bone. The other cars looked wet and cold. Mine looked like it had just come out of a garage. That was when I noticed there was no steam coming from it. The air was freezing. My breath showed. The hood should have had some heat shimmer or faint vapor, especially after driving for hours. There was nothing. No steam, No smell of hot engine, just still air above it. I went into the bathroom. The lights inside buzzed in a way that made my teeth feel odd. The men's room was clean enough, with blue tile, 2 sinks, and 1 hand dryer that had a cracked plastic cover. There was no one in there. I used the toilet, washed my hands, and splashed water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, the lights flickered. Not off, just dim, bright, dim. My reflection moved normally, but for a second, the mirror showed the door behind me standing open. It was closed. I turned around fast. The door was shut, heavy and gray, with no window. I looked back at the mirror. Normal. I dried my hands on my jeans because the hand dryer didn't respond when I pressed the button. Then it turned on by itself as I reached for the door. The blast of hot air made me flinch. Outside, the parking lot looked the same, except the semi at the far end had gone quiet. Its lights were still on, little orange dots along the trailer, but the engine was off now. The whole rest area felt paused. I walked toward my car slower than before. Halfway there, I saw a woman standing beside the silver minivan. She was older, maybe 60, wearing a long gray coat over pajamas and boots with no laces tied. Her hair was short and flattened on one side. She looked like she had been sleeping in the van and had just stepped out. She stared at my car. I said, "Morning," because I didn't know what else to say. She didn't answer right away. Then she looked at me and asked, "Is that yours?" "Yeah." She pointed with 2 fingers. "Why isn't it wet?" I didn't like hearing someone else say it. "I just pulled in," I said. She looked at the dry oval around the car. "I watched you pull in." That made my stomach tighten. "You did?" I was awake, couldn't sleep. She hugged her coat tighter. "It was dry before you stopped." I almost laughed because that didn't make sense. "What do you mean?" She looked around the lot before answering. Her eyes moved from the Subaru to the pickup to the empty road beyond the picnic tables. "I mean, the space was dry," she said, "before your car was in it." I turned and looked at the pavement again. The dry patch really did seem separate from the car. It wasn't shaped like heat spreading from the engine. It was centered under the whole vehicle, too even, too clean. The woman said her name was Vicky Harrow. She had been driving from Baker City to visit her daughter in Walla Walla, got tired, and pulled in around 2. She said the dew was already heavy when she parked. She had woken up because her van's radio turned on by itself. "No music," she said, "just static." I asked if she had seen anything else. She looked past me. "Your car lights were on before you came down the ramp." I turned back to her. "They were not," I said, because I knew they weren't. I had seen the rest area sign, taken the ramp, pulled in like normal. She shook her head. "Not headlights, inside light. My dome light? No." She seemed irritated that she couldn't explain it. The whole car, it looked lit from inside but not bright, like the windows were white. I stood there in the cold, keys digging into my palm. The Camry looked ordinary. Dirty windshield, cracked rear bumper, 1 hubcap missing, a paper coffee cup in the cup holder. There was nothing white in the windows now. Vicky said, "You should touch it." I didn't want to. The second she said it, touching the car felt like a bad idea. But I also knew I would have to get in it to leave. I walked to the driver's side and put my fingers on the roof. It was warm. Not engine warm, because the roof had no reason to be warm. Not slightly above freezing. Warm like a mug that had tea in it a few minutes ago. I spread my palm flat, and the metal held that same steady heat. I pulled my hand back. Vicky whispered, "Mine's ice cold." She touched the roof of her minivan to show me, then wiped her damp fingers on her coat. I checked the hood next. Warm. The trunk. Warm. The driver's door. Warm. The side mirror. Warm. Every part of the car had the same, even heat, like the whole thing had been sitting under a heat lamp. I opened the door. A wave of warm air came out, but it didn't smell like my car. Usually the Camry smelled like stale coffee, old fast food wrappers, and the pine air freshener my niece had hung from the mirror as a joke. This air smelled clean and dry, almost like a room that had never been used. The dashboard clock said 3:17. I checked my phone, 3:17. The problem was that I had pulled into the rest area at 3:17. I remembered glancing at the clock as I parked. I had gone to the bathroom, washed my hands, talked to Vicky, and checked the car. At least 10 minutes had passed. My phone battery was at 9%. It had been at 52 when I left the last gas station. I reached for the charging cable plugged into the console. The end was hot, not warm from use. hot enough that I dropped it onto the seat. The plastic around the tip looked slightly warped. Vicky stepped closer. Something's wrong here. I wanted to say yes, obviously, but I couldn't make myself say anything. A soft clicking sound came from the Subaru 2 spaces over. The locks, lock, unlock, lock, unlock. Then the pickup did it. Then the red hatchback. All around the lot, parked cars began clicking their locks in uneven little bursts. Headlights didn't turn on, alarms didn't sound, just locks moving up and down, like invisible fingers were pressing key fobs. My Camry stayed silent. The restroom lights dimmed. The overhead parking lot lamps stayed on, but the light they gave off seemed thinner. The edges of things got harder to judge. The picnic tables looked farther away than before. The dark hill beyond the rest area seemed closer. Vicky said, "I'm getting in my van." I said, "Yeah." Neither of us moved. There was a low sound now, almost too low to hear. I felt it through the soles of my shoes first, a vibration under the pavement. The kind of deep hum you feel near a big electrical substation, except there was nothing like that nearby. The dew on the other cars began to move. Not drip, move. The tiny beads on the Subaru's roof slid toward the center in slow lines. On the pickup hood, droplets crawled uphill, against the slope of the metal, gathering into 3 small wet circles. Vicky made a small sound and backed away from the minivan. On my car, the dry roof remained dry. Then 3 circles appeared anyway. They formed on the roof above the driver's seat, not as water, but as darker patches in the dust. 3 round marks, each about the size of a coffee mug, arranged in a triangle. The metal inside them was slightly darker, as if something had warmed it more deeply there. I reached out without meaning to. The closest circle was hotter than the rest of the roof. The hum deepened. The parking lot lamps flickered once, and when they came back, there was a light above the hill behind the rest area. It was not high in the sky. It hung just above the black line of scrub and rock, maybe over the far shoulder of the interstate, maybe much farther away. It was a dull white oval, not bright enough to light the ground, but clearly visible. It had the strange look of something seen through smoked glass, except the air was clear. No beam, no blinking, no sound from that direction. Vicky saw it too. She whispered, "No." I looked toward the semi at the far end. The cab was dark. I couldn't see the driver. The orange trailer lights reflected in the dew along its side, but the reflection seemed broken in places, interrupted by thin vertical bands of shadow. The white oval above the hill did not move. The hum came from everywhere. I reached into my car and grabbed my phone. The screen was black now. Holding the power button did nothing. I tried to start the car, but the key would not turn in the ignition. It slid in fine, but it wouldn't rotate, like the steering wheel lock had caught. I yanked the wheel back and forth. Nothing. Vicky had made it to her van. I heard her door open. Then she said, very calmly, "Adrian?" I looked over. She was standing with one hand on the open van door, staring into the front seats. "What? There's frost inside." I walked over, though every part of me wanted to get away from all of it. The inside of her windshield was white with frost. The dashboard had a thin, glittering layer on it. Her steering wheel. Her seats. Even the blanket in the passenger footwell looked stiff, with frozen moisture. She touched the seat and held up her fingers. They came away wet and sparkling. "It was warm when I woke up," she said. "I had the heater on." The locks started clicking again, faster now. Every car except mine. The red hatchback's rear wiper moved once. The pickup's horn gave one weak chirp. The Subaru's headlights turned on, then off, then on again, but the beams looked dim and bluish. The white light above the hill seemed larger. I couldn't tell if it had moved closer or if it was unfolding in place. Its edges spread sideways, smooth and slow. It still didn't light the grass or the road or the bathroom building. That made it worse. A thing that bright should have cast shadows. It should have done something to the world around it. Instead, it only existed. The hum stopped. The silence after it was too sudden. I heard my own breath, Vicky's breath, and one drop of water fall from the minivan mirror to the pavement. Then all the dew on the parked cars vanished. It didn't evaporate in steam. It didn't run off. It was just gone. The Subaru went dry. The pickup went dry. The minivan roof went dry under Vicky's hand. The parking lot lost its wet shine all at once, leaving the asphalt flat and black under the lamps. The dry patch around my car disappeared too, because now everything was dry. Vicky said, "How long have we been here?" I checked my phone again, even though it was dead. The restroom door opened. A man stepped out slowly. He was maybe 40, wearing jeans, a brown jacket, and unlaced work boots. I hadn't seen him go in. He stood under the buzzing light with one hand on the doorframe and looked at us like he didn't know where he was. "Was there an earthquake?" he asked. I said no. He rubbed his forehead. "My watch stopped." Vicky said, "Do you see that light?" The man looked toward the hill. The light was gone. There was only the dark ridge, the interstate beyond it, and a few stars low in the clear sky. The parking lot lamps brightened back to normal. The semi at the far end rumbled to life by itself or because the driver had started it. The sound made me jump. A truck passed on the interstate with a long, wet hiss from its tires. My phone turned on in my hand. The screen showed 317 for 1 second, then jumped to 349. The battery was at 42%. The Camry's interior light came on. The key turned. The engine started like nothing had happened. The heater blasted air from the vents, but the air smelled wrong again, too clean, too dry. The man from the bathroom asked, "Did I fall asleep in there?" None of us answered. Vicky shut her van door, opened it again, and looked inside. The frost was gone. The seats were dry. She touched the steering wheel and laughed once, not because it was funny. I wanted to leave so badly that I almost got in the car and drove without saying anything. Instead, I asked if she was okay to drive. She said, "No, but I'm not staying." That seemed like the right answer. We pulled out one after the other. Me first, Vicky behind me, then the man in the brown jacket in a black Ford I hadn't noticed before. The semi stayed where it was, idling. Nobody came out of it. The on-ramp seemed too long. My headlights showed dry pavement, yellow grass, and low white posts along the side. Halfway up, my radio came back on, even though I hadn't turned it on. It played static for a few seconds, then a station came through in Spanish, then static again. I turned the knob all the way off, but the static continued quietly for another few seconds before fading. I watched Vicky's headlights in my rearview mirror until we merged onto I-84. They stayed behind me for maybe 10 miles. Then she passed me without looking over, both hands tight on the wheel, face pointed straight ahead. I let her go. I stopped again in Ontario after sunrise because I needed gas and because my hands had started shaking too much to hold the wheel properly. The sky was pale pink behind the truck stop sign. People were buying coffee and breakfast burritos inside like the world had not done anything strange in the dark. I parked by the pumps and got out. The car was cold now, normal cold. Dew had formed on the windshield from the temperature change, and the hood had road grime streaks from the drive. I filled the tank and kept looking at the roof. The 3 circles were still there. They were faint, but I could see them when the sunlight hit at an angle. 3 darker spots in the dusty silver paint above the driver's seat, arranged in a triangle. I wiped them with my sleeve. Nothing changed. At the hospital in Boise, Kendra said, "I looked awful." I told her I had driven through the night. Dad was stable and cranky and mostly angry that everyone was fussing over him. I sat beside his bed for a while and tried to listen to the doctor, but I kept feeling like I had left part of myself back at that rest area. That afternoon, I checked my dash cam. I had one mounted behind the rearview mirror because of a fender bender the year before. It recorded continuously when the car was on and saved clips in 10-minute chunks. I expected nothing, or a corrupted file or footage of the lot with no light, because that was how these things seemed to go. Most of the drive was there. The clip before the rest area showed the highway, the exit sign, the ramp. Then the video cut to black. The next file started with me already back on the interstate at 349. There was no clip of the rest area, but there was audio on the black file. Not much, just a low hum for almost the whole 10 minutes. Near the end, there were 3 clicks, evenly spaced. Then a sound like my own voice breathing close to the microphone. I did not hear myself speak. I copied the file to my laptop and then to a drive. The next day, the original on the dash cam was gone. The copy on my laptop stayed, but the timestamp changed from 317 to 417. I know because I had written the original time down. 2 weeks later, after Dad came home, I drove back through Oregon in daylight. I told myself I would stop at the same rest area and see how stupid it looked under the sun. It took me longer than I want to admit to make myself take the exit. The place looked ordinary. Brown hills, bathroom building, vending machine, picnic tables, a bored state maintenance worker emptying trash cans. No white light, no dead phones, no impossible warmth. I parked in the same area, or as close as I could guess. There were only two other cars there. Both had dust on the roofs. I got out and stood beside the Camry. The air was cool and windy. Trucks moved on the interstate. A plastic bag had snagged on a fence and snapped in the gusts. The pavement under my car was dry. So was the whole lot. That meant nothing in daylight with wind and sun. Then I looked closer. There was an oval in the asphalt where the color was different, slightly lighter, smoother, like it had been resurfaced in that one spot years before. I walked around it. The oval was centered where I had parked that night, maybe 2 feet wider than the car on all sides. Near the front edge were 3 small round marks in the pavement. Not holes, not stains, just circles, each about the size of a coffee mug, darker than the asphalt around them. I crouched and touched one. It was warm. The rest of the pavement was cold from the wind. Behind me, the vending machine clicked on by itself. I heard its compressor start humming low and steady, and for a second, every bird in the scrub along the fence went quiet at the same time. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. I was standing on the east bank of the Blackstone River with one shoe sinking into the mud when the thing appeared under the bridge. It was late October, just before dark, and I had gone there to take photos of the old Albion Road Bridge before the town replaced it. My name is Mark Delaney. I was 41 then, living in Lincoln, Rhode Island, and I did part-time photography for local history groups when my actual job at the insurance office was slow. It wasn't glamorous. Mostly old mills, cemetery gates, church interiors, things like that. A historical society volunteer named Ruth had asked if I could get a few pictures of the bridge while it still had the original iron railings. The bridge wasn't famous. It was narrow, patched, and ugly in a useful way. 2 lanes, cracked asphalt, rust on the supports, weeds pushing through the stone abutments. Cars crossed it all day because it connected a residential street to the back road by the bike path. Most people probably never looked at it, except to complain when traffic backed up. I had meant to go earlier, but work ran late, then I got stuck behind a school bus, then I wasted 10 minutes trying to find the little dirt pull-off by the river. By the time I parked, the sky had that washed-out purple color that comes right before night. The air smelled like wet leaves and river mud. It had rained the day before, so the bank was soft and the river was moving higher and faster than usual. I had my Canon on a tripod and a second lens in my coat pocket. Nothing expensive, but good enough. I took wide shots from the road first, then walked down a sloping path through knotweed and brush to get the underside. That was the angle Ruth wanted, the old iron beams against the water. The place felt normal at first. Cars crossed above me every minute or two, tires humming over the deck and making the whole bridge tremble lightly. I could hear a dog barking somewhere up the hill and somebody using a leaf blower in a yard across the road. A commuter train passed in the distance, low and steady, then faded. I set up near a flat rock under a maple tree. The leaves were mostly down, stuck to the mud and floating along the river edges. The water was dark brown, catching a little bit of the remaining sky. I remember being annoyed because every long exposure blurred when cars crossed, so I kept waiting for gaps in traffic. Around 6:12, or close to it, I got the first strange photo. I didn't know it was strange when I took it. I had the camera aimed at the center span where the lowest iron beam ran across the river. A white sedan went over the bridge, and I waited for the vibration to settle. Then I pressed the shutter. The camera clicked, processed for a second, and showed the preview. There was a bright smudge under the bridge. Not huge, just a pale horizontal mark near the water, right under the far side of the span. I thought it was glare from a car headlight or reflection off moving water, so I zoomed in on the screen. The smudge looked smooth and curved, like the edge of a spoon. Then the preview vanished because I hit the wrong button with my glove. I looked up. There was nothing there. The river moved. The bridge dripped. A few dead leaves spun in an eddy beside the middle pier. Nothing shiny. Nothing white. I took another picture. No smudge. That should have been the end of it. Cameras do weird things at dusk: reflections, sensor noise, headlights, lens flare. I knew all that. I had seen enough ruined shots to not make a big deal out of one odd mark. But then my camera clock reset. I noticed because the file name changed, it had been numbering normally, then the next image showed a date from 2017 in the metadata preview. The time said 12. I checked the battery compartment to make sure nothing had loosened. The battery was seated. The charge was at 63%. Everything else worked. My phone still said 6:15. 1 bar of service. I took a few more shots and tried not to think about it. The light was going fast. The underside of the bridge had become a dark shape against the sky, showing through the railings. Cars were less frequent now. The leaf blower had stopped. The dog was quiet. Even the river seemed louder because everything else had thinned out. That was when I heard the tapping. 3 light taps from somewhere above me. Not footsteps on the bridge. Not a car. It sounded like someone tapping a fingernail against a metal pipe. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Then again. I looked up through the beams. I couldn't see anyone on the bridge. The sidewalk was empty. A pickup crossed from left to right and the whole structure rattled. The tapping stopped while it passed. When the pickup was gone, the tapping came back. Tap, tap, tap. It moved from one side of the bridge to the other, slow and careful. I thought maybe water was dripping from a joint, but the rhythm was too clean, and it didn't match any drops hitting the river. I looked around for another person, maybe a kid messing around, but I was alone down there. I took the camera off the tripod and walked closer to the water. The mud pulled at my shoes. The bank sloped under wet leaves, and I had to grab a thin tree trunk to keep from sliding. From there, I had a better view of the space beneath the bridge, just above the river's surface. For a second, the water went flat. That sounds too simple, but that was what happened. The river had been moving around rocks and debris, making little wrinkles and curls. Then an oval patch under the bridge smoothed out completely, maybe 8 or 9 feet across. It looked like glass. The rest of the river kept moving around it. I lowered the camera without taking a picture. The smooth patch stayed in place, even though the water should have carried it downstream. Leaves floated toward it and slowed at the edge, then slid around it in wide arcs. One leaf, a yellow one, stopped dead at the boundary, spun once, and moved backward against the current. I said, "No," quietly, like I was talking to the leaf. The tapping stopped. A car came around the bend above, headlights cutting between the bridge rails. I could hear it approach, but before it reached the bridge, its engine sound dipped. Not off, just muffled, like someone had shut a thick door between us and the road. The headlights washed over the far bank. In that moment, something appeared under the bridge. It was inches above the water. At first, it looked like part of the reflection, a pale piece of sky trapped beneath the span. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw the shape. Smooth, metallic. Longer than my car, but lower and flatter. Maybe like a canoe turned upside down, except wider, with no seams, no windows, no markings, no propeller, no lights. It had a dull silver surface that somehow reflected the dark river and the underside of the bridge without shining. It hovered over the smooth patch of water, not hanging from anything, not resting on the river, just there, steady, with maybe 6 inches between its underside and the surface. I froze with one hand on the tree trunk. The car above slowed before the bridge. I heard the tires on gritty pavement, then nothing. The car did not cross. Its headlights remained visible through the railings at the near end, stopped or nearly stopped. The object under the bridge made no noise. No hum, no buzz, nothing. That was worse than if it had been loud. I could hear my own breathing and the river around the smooth patch, but from the thing itself, there was nothing at all. The air felt warmer against my face. The camera strap slid down my wrist, and that little movement snapped me enough to lift it. I pressed the shutter. The camera did not click. The screen was black, not off because the battery icon was still faintly visible in the corner. The viewfinder was black too. I pressed the shutter again. Nothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look at it. The object shifted slightly. Not moved forward, not drifted. More like it turned a few degrees without disturbing the air or water. As it did, the surface changed. A dark line appeared along one side, thin and curved, then vanished. I couldn't tell if it was a shadow or a seam or just my eyes trying to make sense of a smooth thing in bad light. The stopped car above honked once. A normal, impatient little beep. The sound came through wrong. It stretched out lower and slower, like a tape dragging. The headlights flickered through the bridge railing. Then the car engine rose back to normal and it started across. Before its front wheels reached the bridge deck, the metallic object folded out of sight. That is the closest way I can describe it. It did not shoot away. It did not sink. It did not become invisible in a clean way. The middle of it seemed to narrow, and the ends drew inward like a reflection disturbed by a stone. The smooth patch of river collapsed into ripples at the same time. By the time the car crossed over me, the object was gone. The bridge shook hard with the weight of the car. The river splashed against the rocks. A gust of air came down from the road and stirred the dead leaves by my feet. I stood there until the car taillights disappeared around the bend. My camera clicked. One photo. I almost dropped it. The screen came back on, and the preview showed the underside of the bridge after the object had vanished. Just water, beams, and a blurred streak from the passing car's headlights. The camera clock still said 12. I climbed back up the bank too fast and slipped twice. Mud got all over my jeans. I didn't care. I folded the tripod badly, left one leg half extended, and shoved it under my arm. My car was parked about 30 yards away in the dirt pull-off, facing the road. When I reached it, the windows were fogged from the inside. I had not left the heat on. The engine was off. The car had been sitting empty for maybe 40 minutes with the windows closed. Every window was clouded over on the inside, thick enough that I couldn't see through them. I unlocked it. The locks didn't respond at first. I pressed the fob again. Nothing. I tried the key in the driver's door, and the lock turned with a stiff little click. When I opened the door, warm air came out. The inside smelled like river water and pennies. I sat down but didn't close the door right away. The dashboard clock said 6:17. My phone said 6:17. That should have been right, more or less, except I knew more time had passed. I had been under that bridge for at least 20 minutes after first checking my phone at 6:15. It should have been closer to 6:35. I checked the call log because of the buzz I had felt. There was a missed call from my own number, same name, because I had myself saved as Mark Sell years ago for some reason and never changed it. The missed call showed 6:17. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then something tapped the passenger window. 3 taps. The sound was light right beside me. I turned so fast my neck hurt. Nothing was outside the window except brush and the dark slope down to the river. On the glass, 3 clear circles had appeared in the fog, arranged in a triangle. Each was about the size of a fingertip. I slammed the door, started the car, and backed out of the pull-off without checking for traffic. A horn blared from the road. I hit the brake. A silver SUV passed so close its headlights filled my windshield. I hadn't seen it coming. Not in the mirror, not through the trees, not from the road. It swerved around me, and the driver leaned on the horn as it went over the bridge. The bridge sounded normal again. Tires, engine, metal rattle. I drove home with the heat blasting and both hands locked on the wheel. I lived in a second-floor apartment in Pawtucket over a barber shop. By the time I got there, it was fully dark. Normal traffic, normal porch lights, normal people walking dogs and carrying takeout containers. That helped until I parked and looked at my camera. The photos from the bridge were all there except the first strange one. The file numbers skipped. I had shot 4821, 4822, 4823, then it jumped to 4825. The image with the pale smudge should have been 4824. It was gone. Not corrupted. Gone. I checked the card on my laptop. Same thing. No 4824. The final photo, the one the camera took after the object disappeared, had bad metadata. Date 2017. Time 12 hours. But the image itself looked ordinary at first. I zoomed in anyway. Under the bridge, near the water, there were 3 white dots. They were tiny, barely there, arranged in a triangle just above the surface of the river. They might have been reflections. They might have been sensor noise. But they were exactly where the object had hovered. I did not sleep well that night. In the morning, I called Ruth from the Historical Society and told her I needed to reshoot because the light had been bad. She said no problem, but the town was closing the bridge to traffic the next afternoon for inspection before the replacement work. If I wanted more shots with cars on it, I had one day. I told her I'd go back after work. I almost didn't. All day at the office, I felt like there was pressure behind my ears. The copier jammed twice when I used it. My phone battery dropped from 70 to 12 by lunch. I kept opening the missed call from my own number and then closing it because there was nothing to learn from staring at it. Around 4, my coworker Dinesh asked if I was sick. I said I had a headache. He said I looked like I had seen something bad. I almost told him. Instead, I said, bad traffic. I went back to the bridge at 5:30. I brought a second camera, an old Nikon that belonged to my dad, and a cheap voice recorder I used for notes. I also parked on the opposite side this time near a little gravel strip by the bike path because I didn't want to be in the same pull-off. The weather had changed. The sky was cloudy and low with a wet smell in the air. Not raining yet, but close. The river ran darker than the day before. Leaves moved fast in the current. There were more cars because people were heading home from work. The bridge thumped and rattled every few seconds. That made it feel safer. If something happened, at least there were people above me. That was what I told myself. I walked down to the west bank and set both cameras on the tripod one at a time, taking the same shots from different angles. The voice recorder sat in my jacket pocket running. I narrated quietly, mostly to keep myself calm. 5:46. Cars passing every 30 seconds. River high, no unusual lights, no sounds besides traffic. I felt ridiculous saying it. At 5:58, traffic stopped. Not fully stopped like a jam, because I couldn't see the road, but no car crossed for longer than usual. The bridge went still, no tire hum, no vibration through the bank, just river and distant evening noises. I waited. Then I heard a sound from under the bridge, a soft scrape. Metal on stone, maybe. Not loud. It came from the center span, near the same place as before. I crouched without thinking, lowering myself behind some tall weeds along the bank. The river under the bridge smoothed into an oval. My throat closed up. This time, I had the Nikon in my hands. Fully mechanical shutter. Fresh film, no screen to fail. I lifted it and focused under the bridge. The metallic object appeared lower than before. It was so smooth that my eyes kept sliding off it. The shape was not exactly the same. Yesterday, I had thought canoe or flattened oval. This time it looked wider in the middle, with a shallow dip along the top, like it had been pressed down by some careful force. Still no lights, no seams, no markings. Its surface showed a dull reflection of the river, but the reflection didn't match the water below it. It hovered inches above the river, perfectly still. A line of cars waited at the far end of the bridge. I could see their headlights through the railings. They were stopped, all of them, as if at a red light that didn't exist. No one honked, no engines revved. The whole line just sat there. The object turned slightly. The air smelled warm and metallic. I pressed the Nikon shutter. It clicked. The object did not react. I took another. Click. Wound the lever. Took another. My hands shook, but the camera worked. I took 4 photos before the voice recorder in my pocket began playing back my own voice. Not live. Playback. 5:46. Cars passing every 30 seconds. River high. The little speaker sounded muffled under my jacket. I froze with the camera halfway to my face. The recorder continued. No unusual lights, no sounds besides traffic. Then in my own voice, though I had not said it before, it added, "It knows I came back." I yanked the recorder from my pocket and dropped it in the mud. The object under the bridge shifted toward me. It didn't travel across the water. It was simply closer, maybe by 10 feet. The smooth patch moved with it. The river curved around the invisible boundary, leaves sliding away before reaching the hull or body or whatever it was. Something tapped the bridge above. 3 taps, then 3 more, closer to the near side. A car door opened somewhere above me. I heard it clearly. Then another, then nothing. No voices, no footsteps, just open doors and silence. I should have run then. I know that. But I was crouched in mud with a camera in my hands, staring at something impossible, and my body felt like it had forgotten the order of things. The object tilted. For the first time, I saw its underside. It was darker than the top, a dull gray with 3 shallow circular depressions arranged in a triangle. They were not lights. They did not glow. They looked more like marks pressed into the metal. The river below them dimpled in 3 spots, each spot directly under one depression. Then all 3 dimples pulled upward. Water rose from the river in three thin columns, maybe an inch wide, stretching toward the underside of the object without touching it. The columns held for 2 seconds, smooth and clear, then fell back without splashing. I dropped the Nikon. The sound it made, hitting a rock, seemed to break whatever was holding the bridge still. A horn blared above, then another. Engines started up all at once. Car doors slammed. Someone shouted, "Move!" A vehicle crossed the bridge, shaking it hard. The object disappeared just before the first car reached the center. Same as before. It didn't fly away. It folded inward, flattened into the reflection, and was gone. The water patch broke into normal current. Leaves rushed through the space where it had been. I grabbed the Nikon from the mud and scrambled up the bank. At the road, cars were moving again, but everyone looked irritated in a normal commuter way, not terrified. A man in a red pickup had his window down and was yelling at the car ahead of him to learn how to drive. A woman in a beige sedan rubbed her face with both hands at the wheel. I walked up to the sidewalk by the bridge, muddy and out of breath. The driver of the beige sedan looked at me. Her face changed when she saw the camera and my clothes. "Did you see why we stopped?" I asked. She stared at me for a second, then she said, "The road went white." "What?" She swallowed. Just for a second, I couldn't see the bridge. The car behind her honked, and she drove on. I stood there while traffic passed around me. My phone said 6:17. Again, it had said 5:58 before the traffic stopped. I had been down there at least several minutes. The clock should not have been 6:17, and at the same time it should have been later than 6:17. I couldn't make it fit. I went home and put the Nikon in a drawer without opening it. I don't know why. Part of me was afraid the photos would show nothing. Part of me was afraid they wouldn't. The next day, the bridge closed. Ruth called me around noon asking if I had heard. An inspector had found a problem with one of the lower supports during the morning check. She sounded upset because the town decided not to reopen it before demolition prep. I asked what kind of problem. She said one of the iron beams under the center span had warped. I drove there after work. Barricades blocked both ends. A police cruiser sat on one side with its lights off. I parked by the bike path and walked as close as I could. From the bank, I could see the underside. One of the old iron beams near the middle had bent downward in a clean curve, not like rust failure or impact damage, more like it had softened and sagged, then cooled again. The river under it moved normally. A town worker in a yellow vest saw me taking photos and told me I had to back up. I asked if a truck had hit the bridge from below somehow, like a boat or debris. He laughed once. "On this river?" "No." "Then what bent it?" He looked toward the beam, then back at me. "That's what they're arguing about." That night, I finally took the film to a lab in Providence that still developed rolls. The kid at the counter said it would take a few days. I paid extra for scans. I did not tell him what might be on it. 3 days later, I got the email. Most of the photos were normal. Blurry bridge, dark river, a bad shot of my shoe. Then 4 frames from the moment under the bridge. They showed the river, they showed the underside of the bridge. They did not show the object. But in each frame, the water beneath the bridge had a smooth oval patch, clear as glass with the normal current broken around it. In the third photo, 3 thin columns of water rose from the river toward nothing. In the fourth, the columns were gone, and 3 small white dots appeared in the empty space where the underside should have been. I saved the scans. When I picked up the negatives, the kid at the lab said, "You double exposed these somehow." I asked what he meant. He held one strip up to the light. "There's writing on a few frames." I looked. Across the blank area under the bridge, faint and tiny, was a line of text. Not printed letters, more like scratches in the emulsion. It said 6:17. I asked if the machine did that. The kid shrugged. "Never seen it." I kept the negatives in a folder in my desk for about a month. Then one evening, after a long day at work, I found mud on my apartment floor. 3 wet footprints led from the door to the desk. Not shoe prints, bare, narrow marks too long to be mine, pressed in river mud. They stopped in front of the drawer where I kept the negatives. The folder was still there. Inside it, the 4 bridge frames were warm to the touch. I put them in a metal cash box and drove them to Ruth at the Historical Society the next morning. I told her they were just reference photos and asked her to store them with the bridge archive. She said I looked pale and asked if I needed water. I said no. The bridge came down 2 weeks later. I watched from the public side of the barricade with maybe 20 other people. A crane lifted pieces of old railing onto a flatbed. Workers cut the warped beam out last. When it swung in the air, turning slowly on the chain, I saw the underside of it. There were 3 clean circular marks in the rust, arranged in a triangle. I was crossing the lower pasture behind the old county fairgrounds when my phone switched to airplane mode by itself. It was a little after 7 on a warm evening in early June, and I had gone out there because my sister's dog had slipped his collar again. My sister, Paige, lived 3 houses down from me in Greenfield, Indiana, and her dog Otis was one of those brown mutts that looked guilty even when he was asleep. He had a habit of squeezing under fences and running toward the fairgrounds because people left food near the livestock barns after events. My name is Evan Sutter. I was 36 then, and I worked maintenance for the school district. I knew the fairgrounds pretty well because the district used the open fields behind it for overflow parking during football tournaments. It was not a spooky place. It was flat, mostly empty, with a few gravel access roads, a line of cottonwoods by the drainage creek, and old metal bleachers stacked behind the horse arena. On summer evenings, you could hear traffic from State Road 9 and kids yelling from the ball fields across town. That night had been hot all day, but the temperature had dropped after sunset. The grass was damp around my shoes from the humidity. There was no wind. The sky was clear except for a thin band of pink clouds over the west side of town. It was light enough to see, but the field had started turning gray in that weird half-dark way where distances get hard to judge. I had a leash in one hand and my phone in the other, using the flashlight even though I didn't really need it yet. Paige was circling around by the rodeo gate in her car, and my neighbor Malik had said he would check the ditch near the highway. I walked the middle route across the pasture, calling Otis in that fake cheerful voice you use when you're mad at a dog but don't want him to know it. The phone buzzed once in my hand. I looked down because I thought Paige had texted me. The airplane icon was on. At first, I thought I had bumped it with my thumb. I had done that before, accidentally pulling down the control screen, but the screen was locked. I hadn't been touching anything except the edge of the case. The signal bars were gone, Wi-Fi gone, Bluetooth gone, airplane mode, clear as day. I stopped walking. Right then, the ground started humming. Not shaking, not like an earthquake. It was lower and steadier than that, a vibration that seemed to come up through the soles of my shoes and into my calves. It made the grass tremble very slightly around my feet. The sound wasn't loud, but it had weight to it, like a big engine idling underground. I looked toward the road, thinking maybe a semi had stopped nearby or some farm equipment was running behind the barns. Nothing moved. No headlights, no tractor noise, no generator. The hum stayed under me. I turned my flashlight toward the ground. The beam shook in my hand, but the dirt itself looked normal. Grass, clover, a few muddy tire ruts from earlier in the week. Then I noticed the insects had stopped. That field was usually loud in June. Crickets, bugs in the grass, frogs down by the creek. A minute before, I had heard all of it without paying attention. Now it was quiet. Not quieter. Quiet. I unlocked my phone and tried to turn airplane mode off. The switch slid back by itself. I tried again. Same thing. I turned it off. The icon vanished for half a second, then came back on like someone on the other side of the screen had tapped it. I said, "Come on," because that was easier than being scared. The flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. Then it went dim, like the battery had dropped to 1%. It was at 64 when I left the house. I remembered because Paige had texted me a photo of Otis's empty collar, and I had seen the battery then. The low vibration got stronger. Something moved in the grass about 20 yards ahead. I lifted the phone light, weak as it was, and aimed it in that direction. At first I thought it was Otis, low and dark, weaving through the field. Then the shape stopped, and I realized it was not above the grass. It was the grass itself moving, bending in a narrow line from right to left, like something invisible was walking through it. I held still. The line of bending grass crossed in front of me, maybe 15 yards away, without sound. It moved too smoothly for an animal. No hopping, no rustling, no body pushing through weeds. Just a strip of grass folding down and rising back up after it passed. The vibration pulsed once under my feet. My phone screen went black. I pressed the side button. Nothing. I pressed it again. Nothing. Then the screen came on by itself, showing the camera app. I hadn't opened the camera. The image on the screen showed the field ahead of me, but the colors were wrong. Everything was pale and washed out, almost like night vision, even though my phone didn't have anything like that. The grass looked silver. The sky looked black. In the middle distance, near the cottonwoods by the creek, there was a bright white patch hanging just above the ground. I looked up from the screen. I could not see the white patch with my eyes. On the phone, it was there. A smooth oval of light low over the field, not bright enough to cast any light in the real world, but clear on the screen. It seemed to float maybe 5 feet above the grass, just this dull white shape with soft edges. No beam, no flashing, nothing dramatic. I looked down at the phone again, and the oval was larger, or closer. I turned around and started walking back toward the fairgrounds. I tried to walk normally at first because some stubborn part of me didn't want to run from something I couldn't even see. The hum followed me through the ground. Each step felt slightly wrong, like the soil had a thin rubber layer under it. My knees felt loose. I called Paige's name, not through the phone, just out loud. My voice dropped flat in the air. It didn't carry. It sounded like I had spoken into a closet. I could see the fairground lights in the distance, the yellow bulbs over the livestock barn, and the blue-white security light by the ticket shed. They looked too far away. I had not walked that far into the pasture, maybe 200 yards. The lights looked half a mile off. I kept walking faster. The phone in my hand vibrated again. The screen showed an incoming call from Paige, but airplane mode was still on. The caller ID had her photo, the one where she was squinting in the sun at our cousin's lake house. It rang without sound, just the screen pulsing. I answered. There was no voice, only the same low hum, but sharper, like it had been fed through the tiny speaker. Under it, very faint, I could hear myself breathing. Then Paige's voice came through, or something close to it. Evan? I almost cried from relief. Where are you? There was a delay. Evan? I'm in the field. My phone is messed up. Can you hear me? Another delay, longer this time. Then her voice said, don't stand where it's warm. The call ended. I stared at the screen. Airplane mode was still on. I stopped walking because of what she said, and that was when I noticed the warmth. The air around my legs had changed. The evening was cooling down, but the ground under me felt warm through my shoes. I lifted one foot and put it down a few inches to the side. Same warmth. I crouched and held my palm above the grass. Heat came up from the soil. Not a lot, not burning, but steady like standing over pavement in August. I stepped backward, cold grass, forward, warm grass. The boundary between them was sharp, almost a line. The hum sat under the warm patch. I backed away slowly. Then I saw the circles. The grass ahead of me had flattened in 3 round spots arranged in a triangle. Each circle was maybe 4 feet across. The grass inside them lay smooth and pressed down, all in one direction, but not broken. The ground in those circles looked darker, damp maybe, and faint mist rose off them, though the air around me was clear. I had crossed between them without noticing. My mouth went dry. I tried to shout for Paige again, but the sound came out small. The fairground lights flickered, all of them at once. Barn lights, ticket shed, security pole, even the red light on the radio tower beyond town. They dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. When they came back, the field between me and them looked different. There were too many fence posts. I knew that field. There was one old split-rail fence near the horse arena and a line of temporary metal stakes along the gravel road. Now I saw dark vertical shapes scattered across the pasture between me and the fairgrounds. Thin and still, maybe 50 of them. They stood at uneven distances, all the same height, darker than the dusk around them. I blinked hard. The shapes were gone. The hum cut out for 1 second. In that 1 second, every insect in the field made noise at once. Crickets, frogs, cicadas, all bursting back like someone had turned up a radio. Then the hum returned, and they stopped again. Something tapped the back of my phone. 3 tiny taps. I dropped it into the grass. The screen stayed on, facing up. The camera still showed the field in that pale, wrong color. On the screen, The white oval near the cottonwoods was no longer low to the ground. It was higher, above the tree line, and there were 3 dark points inside it arranged in a triangle. I looked toward the cottonwoods with my own eyes. For a second, I saw nothing. Then a star disappeared. It was just one point of light above the trees. It went out, then another beside it, then another, slow and uneven, like a dark object was moving across the sky. I couldn't see the thing itself. Only the stars it blocked. It drifted from right to left against the direction the high clouds were moving. The ground vibration became a pressure in my chest. I picked up the phone and ran. The field did not feel like the same field anymore. The fairground lights stayed ahead, but they did not seem closer. My shoes slipped in damp grass. The leash in my hand whipped against my leg. I kept expecting to hit a ditch or step into a hole, but the ground stayed smooth. Behind me, the phone camera flashed. I didn't press anything. It just fired a bright white flash into the grass as I ran. The light bounced off something on the ground to my left. A metal stake, I thought. But when I passed it, it wasn't a stake. It was a thin black post about waist high, smooth and narrow, standing upright in the field. No sign, no wire, no flag. I had time to see one more beyond it, then another. The shapes I had seen were real, at least for that moment. They stood in loose rows, all facing no direction because they had no faces, no sides, no anything. The phone flashed again. The posts were gone. I tripped then, not over a post, but over nothing I could see. My foot caught hard on empty air and I went down on my hands and knees. The phone skidded away, the weak flashlight beam spinning across the grass. The ground was hot where my palms landed. I scrambled up, but the vibration under me deepened until my teeth ached. The grass around my hands flattened outward in a circle, not from my weight. It spread from a point just ahead of me, bending away like wind, except there was no wind on my face. I heard Otis bark. One bark. Close. I turned toward it. He was standing maybe 20 yards away, near the creek side of the field. I could just make out his shape in the dusk, head low, ears back. His leash was not on him. He looked at me, then past me, then lowered himself into the grass like he was trying to disappear. "Otis," I whispered. He didn't move. The white light appeared behind him. This time I saw it without the phone. It hung just above the cottonwoods, not huge, not blazing, not like a movie. A dull white oval, smooth and quiet, visible but not lighting the trees beneath it. The branches stayed black. The field stayed gray. The object just sat there, as if brightness did not work the normal way around it. Otis whined. I took one step toward him. The ground between us rose, only a little. A long, shallow swell moved under the grass, crossing from left to right as if something large passed beneath the soil. It made no crack, no dirt, no tearing, just a smooth lift and drop traveling across the field. Otis backed away from it, tail tucked. I stopped. The phone rang from the grass behind me, not my ringtone. An old landline sound, sharp and plain. Ring, ring. I turned and saw the screen glowing. The caller ID said Page again. I picked it up and answered, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. Before I could speak, Page's voice said, "I can see you." I looked toward the fairgrounds. There was no car there that I could see. No headlights on the gravel road. The lights looked farther than ever. "Where are you?" I asked. "I can see you," she repeated. Her voice sounded flat, not afraid, not anything. "Page, stop. Tell me where you are." There was a click. Then a different sound came through. Not a voice. It reminded me of a microphone brushing against cloth, or someone dragging a finger over a speaker. Under it, in a whisper that was almost my own voice, I heard, "Observer present." I threw the phone down. The white oval over the trees began to move. It slid slowly to the left, staying just above the tree line. The low vibration moved with it through the ground. I felt it pass under my feet, then under my knees, then farther away. As it moved, the warm patch moved too, leaving cold, damp grass behind. The stars it blocked came back one by one after it passed. I did not wait to see where it went. I ran to Otis. He tried to back away from me at first, then to recognize me all at once and crawled forward on his belly. I grabbed his collar with one hand and held him tight enough that he yelped. I didn't let go. I clipped the leash on with shaking fingers and pulled him toward the fairgrounds. This time the lights got closer. The field became just a field again. Wet grass, uneven ground, burrs on my socks, The insects came back in patches behind me, like sound returning to places after I passed through them. Otis kept looking over his shoulder but stayed with me. When I reached the gravel road by the horse arena, Paige's car was there with the driver's door open and headlights on. She was standing beside it, phone in hand. She shouted my name and ran toward me. I almost yelled at her for calling me, for saying those things, for whatever had happened. But when she reached me, she was crying and angry and shaking harder than I was. "Where were you?" she said. "In the field." "No," she said. "I was looking right at the field. I was in it." She looked past me into the dark grass. "You weren't. You were just gone." Malik pulled up then in his truck from the highway side, kicking gravel. He got out and asked if we were okay. Otis pulled toward Paige and hid behind her legs. I asked Paige if she had called me. She held up her phone. It wouldn't work. Nothing worked. Her screen showed no service, but not airplane mode. She said she had seen me walking across the field at first. Then the fairground lights flickered, and I wasn't there anymore. She thought I had fallen in the grass or gone behind the little rise, so she drove around the edge. She called and called. None of the calls went through. I told her my phone showed her calling. She shook her head. I picked my phone up from where I thought I had dropped it, but it wasn't there. I still had it in my hand. I don't remember picking it back up after throwing it down. The screen was cracked across the corner. Airplane mode was off. It had 3 bars of service. This Frolwinins. The time said 7:41. Paige said I had been gone for 23 minutes. To me, it felt like maybe 8. Malik wanted to walk the field with his flashlight, but I told him not to. I said I felt sick and wanted to leave. That was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I could still feel a weak vibration in the gravel, like a faraway truck idling under the road, and I did not want him standing out there when it came back. We got Otis into Paige's car. He curled up on the floorboard and would not lift his head. Before we left, I looked back at the pasture. The grass in the middle had 3 darker circles arranged in a triangle. I could see them from the road even in the low light because a thin mist still rose from each one. Malik saw them too. "What is that?" he asked. "Sprinklers, maybe," Paige said, though there were no sprinklers out there. Nobody answered after that. I went home with Paige because I didn't want to be alone. We sat in her kitchen under bright lights while Otis slept behind the couch. Her husband Luis made coffee even though nobody wanted any. I tried to explain it in order, but every time I said one part out loud, the next part sounded worse. My phone showed no incoming calls from Paige during the time I was in the field. There were 2 outgoing calls to my own number, both at 7:17, both lasting 0 seconds. The camera roll had 5 new photos. I hadn't taken any that I remembered, except maybe the flashes. 4 were black. The 5th showed the pasture in that pale, washed-out color, with the cottonwoods in the distance and the white oval above them. But when I zoomed in, the object wasn't the strange part. The strange part was me. I was standing near the center of the field, maybe 30 feet from the camera, facing away. My arms hung at my sides. Otis was beside me, sitting perfectly still. Around us were 3 thin black posts arranged in a triangle. They were taller than they had seemed when I ran past them, maybe shoulder height. Paige asked if she could send the picture to herself. I said yes. The text failed 3 times, even though we were on her Wi-Fi. Then the photo disappeared from my camera roll, not deleted into recently deleted. Gone. The 4 black photos stayed. Luis said phones did weird things when they were damaged. I said yeah. Paige looked at him like she wanted him to stop talking. The next morning, I went back because I needed to see the field in daylight. I didn't go alone. Paige, Luis, Malik, and I all went together around 10. The fairgrounds looked completely normal. Mowers were running by the exhibit hall. A man in a county parks shirt was unlocking the maintenance shed. Kids were practicing baseball on the far diamond. The pasture had dew on the grass, tractor ruts, and a few muddy spots near the creek. No mist, no black posts, no white object. No obvious reason to feel like the place was watching us, but the 3 circles were there. The grass inside them was pressed flat, all in the same direction, and the soil was dry. That was the part that bothered Luis. The rest of the field was wet enough to soak our shoes. Inside those circles, the ground was dry and warm. Malik knelt and put his palm down. "That's not sun," he said. At the center of each circle was a small hole, not deep enough to see into, not wide enough for an animal burrow. Just a clean, narrow puncture in the dirt, about the width of a pencil. The holes were identical. I pushed a twig into one. It slid down farther than the twig was long, then dropped out of my fingers with no sound. Paige told me to stop. I stood up. My phone, which had been in my pocket, switched to airplane mode. All four of us heard the hum, very low, under the field, under our shoes. The mower by the exhibit hall kept going. Cars moved on the road. Kids shouted from the baseball diamond. The world had not stopped this time, but the ground under the circles had started to vibrate again. Otis, who Paige had left in the car, began barking. Not his normal bark, a high, panicked sound. We ran back to the gravel road. By the time we reached the car, my phone had service again. The hum was gone. The circles in the grass looked ordinary from a distance, just flattened patches that could have been made by deer or equipment or kids messing around. I did not go into that field again. A week later, the county fairgrounds put up temporary fencing around part of the pasture. The sign said soil testing. I asked a grounds worker named Carol, who I knew from school maintenance, what they were testing for. She said sinkholes, maybe. Someone had reported weird soft ground. I asked if they found anything. She said, "Not soft, that's the thing. Hard as concrete under there." Then she looked around and lowered her voice. "They had a compass out yesterday, and it kept pointing down." I asked what she meant. She shook her head. Exactly what I said. That night, Paige called me around 7:17. I didn't answer at first because of the time. Then I felt stupid and picked up. She didn't say hello. For a second, there was only a low vibration through the phone speaker. Then Otis barked in the background, and Paige said, "Sorry." Pocket dial. Her voice sounded normal. Tired, but normal. I told her it was fine. After we hung up, my phone stayed warm in my hand for almost 10 minutes. I was checking the lower field because the ewes had gone quiet. That was what made me put my boots back on. Not a noise, not a dog barking, not a gate banging in the wind. It was the lack of noise. I had kept sheep most of my life, and a field of 60 animals never went completely silent unless something had changed. They coughed, shuffled, tore grass, bumped each other, called to lambs, even when there were no lambs around. There was always some little sound. That night, there was nothing. My name is Gareth Wynne. I lived on a small hill farm outside Landovery in Carmarthenshire, about 2 miles up a lane that turned to mud every winter and dust every dry summer. The house had belonged to my parents before me, and most of the land was rough grazing with stone walls that needed more repairing than I could ever keep up with. I had a collie named Fionn, a red quad bike that started when it felt like it, and a kitchen window that looked down over the lower pasture toward the black line of forestry on the far side. It was late November, a cold, damp night after a day of hard rain. Not stormy exactly, just miserable. The kind of wet that got into gate hinges and coat sleeves. By evening, the clouds had broken enough for a few stars to show, but there was no moon. The fields were dark except where the yard light reached the top gate, and the sheep showed as pale lumps farther down the hill. I had been in the kitchen doing invoices with the radio low. Fionn lay by the stove, twitching in her sleep. I remember looking up because the radio crackled once, then went quiet for about 2 seconds before coming back with a Welsh language song I didn't know. Nothing unusual. Reception always dipped in bad weather. Then Fionn lifted her head. She didn't bark. She just raised her head and stared at the window. I looked out and saw the lower field. At first it seemed normal. Dark grass, wet shine on the track, the old ash tree by the wall leaning as it always did. Then I realized I couldn't hear the sheep through the cracked window. I always left it open a little because the stove made the kitchen too warm, and even at that distance I usually heard them, a murmur, a bleat, something. I opened the back door. Cold air came in, smelling of mud and wet wool. The yard light buzzed above me. Far down in the lower field, every sheep was standing, not grazing, not lying down, standing. I called Fionn, but she didn't come. She stayed by the stove, ears back, watching me from across the kitchen. That bothered me more than the sheep at first. Fionn lived to work. She would chase a shadow if I whistled for it. That night, she would not cross the kitchen. I grabbed my coat, took the torch from the hook, and went out alone. The yard stones were slick. Water still ran in little lines down the track, and my boots sank where the gravel thinned. I shut the gate behind me and started down toward the lower pasture. The farmhouse light fell away quickly. The lane curved behind the barn, and after that, the world became mostly black shapes in the pale beam of my torch. Halfway down, I stopped. The sheep were in a circle. A perfect circle. They had gathered in the middle of the lower field, maybe 50 yards from the forestry fence. I could see them as white backs and dark heads in the torchlight. Every one of them stood shoulder to shoulder around the edge of the circle, all facing outward. None faced in. None moved. Their heads were up, ears forward, bodies tight. The inside of the circle was empty grass. I had never seen them do anything like it. Sheep bunched together when spooked, but they press inward, facing all directions, moving over each other, making a racket. This was different. This was arranged. I whistled softly. No response. Usually even a quiet whistle would make a few look toward me. These didn't. The ones on my side stared past me up the field, not at me, but into the dark between me and the barn. The ones on the far side faced the forestry. Those on the left faced the stone wall. Those on the right faced the creek dip. All outward. All silent. I said, "What are you doing then?" My voice sounded too small. The torch flickered. I shook it, thinking the batteries were going. The beam steadied, then weakened again. I always kept spare batteries in the kitchen, not in my coat, which annoyed me right away because it gave me something normal to be annoyed about. A low vibration came through the ground. It was not loud. I felt it before I was sure I heard it, a dull pressure under my boots. At first I thought it was a lorry on the road below the valley, or maybe machinery from one of the forestry tracks. But there was no engine sound with it. No rumble fading in and out. Just a steady low note that seemed to come from the wet soil itself. The sheep did not react. That was the worst part. Whatever had put them in that circle had already happened, or was happening, and they were past panic. They stood like they were waiting. I walked closer. The mud sucked at my boots. My torch beam caught drops of water on the grass, making them flash white. As I got near the circle, the air warmed. Not much, but enough that I noticed it against my cheeks. The field had been cold all evening. Now the air around the sheep felt almost like standing near a tractor engine after it had been running. The vibration grew stronger. One ewe on the near side had a black mark across her nose. I knew her. Number 37. She was nervous, always last through a gate, first to bolt if a dog she didn't know came near. She stood completely still, facing outward with her nostrils wide. Her eyes reflected the torch in two flat green points. I reached toward her. Before my hand touched her wool, every sheep in the circle took one step backward, all at the same time. Not a shuffle, not one animal causing the rest to move. A single step as if pulled by the same thought. The circle tightened, but it kept its shape. Their hooves made one soft, wet sound in the grass. I stepped back too. The empty space inside the circle had changed. The grass there lay flat, pressed smooth in a round patch. It was not trampled the way sheep would trample it. It all leaned the same direction, clockwise, bent but not broken. In the exact center were three darker spots arranged in a triangle, each about the size of a dinner plate. I lifted the torch. The beam dimmed until it was almost useless. Then the phone in my pocket buzzed. I had no signal in that field most nights, not enough to call out anyway. I took it out, thinking maybe my brother Reese had texted from town. The screen was black for a second, then lit on its own. Airplane mode was on. I had not turned it on. I had been listening to the radio in the kitchen and hadn't touched the phone since checking the weather before tea. I tried to switch it off. The button slid back by itself. The vibration in the ground pulsed once, hard enough that I felt it in my knees. The sheep lowered their heads. All of them. Not to graze. They angled their faces slightly down and out as if bracing into wind. But there was no wind. The bare branches of the ash tree behind them did not move. My coat hung still. Even my breath seemed to stay close to my face instead of drifting. Then I heard Fionn barking from the house. One bark, then another. Far away, muffled by the hill and the barn. She sounded frantic, but she did not come down. I wanted to go back up then. I should have, but it is hard to leave animals when something is wrong with them. That was the plain truth. They were my responsibility, and I was standing there trying to make fear fit into normal farm duties. I walked around the circle slowly. The sheep did not turn their heads as I passed. Each one kept facing outward. Their bodies made a white wall in the dark. When I reached the far side near the forestry fence, the air got warmer again. There was a smell there too. Faint, metallic, like an old electric fence battery or wet wire. Beyond the fence, the trees were black and thick. Sitka spruce planted too close together, blocking what little starlight there was. My torch should have lit the first few trunks, but the beam seemed to die before it reached them. It didn't fade with distance. It just stopped. The low vibration changed pitch. The sheep closest to the forestry opened their mouths. No sound came out. They stood with mouths open, all facing the dark trees, making no bleat at all. I saw their throats move. I saw their breath puff. Nothing. That made something in me give way. I started backing up. The phone buzzed again in my hand. The screen showed an incoming call from my own landline number, the house phone hanging in the kitchen by the fridge. I stared at it, confused, because nobody was in the house except Fionn and she wasn't making calls. I answered. There was no voice at first, just a low vibration, clearer through the speaker than through the ground. Then I heard my kitchen radio, faint and crackling, playing the same song from earlier. Under that, very far away, Fionn barking. Then my own voice came through. Not speaking words, breathing, a short nervous breath, then another. Like the phone had somehow picked up me standing in the field and played it back half a second late. I ended the call. The screen stayed lit, showing the call duration as 0417. It did not change. I put the phone in my pocket and started toward the gate. The sheep moved again. One step backward, all of them, tightening the circle further. This time a few bumped shoulders. Still no sound, no hooves scraping, no bleeding. They were too quiet for living animals. The empty patch inside the circle began to steam, not smoke. Steam or mist, very thin, rising straight up from the flattened grass. It formed 3 narrow columns above the darker spots. The columns rose maybe waist-high and held there, steady, not drifting. The field smelled warmer, wetter, like mud after hot rain. I whispered, "No." A light appeared above the trees. It did not come on like a lamp. It was simply there when I looked up, hanging just over the forestry line on the far side of the field. A dull white oval, wide and smooth, not bright enough to light the ground, but clear against the black sky. The trees beneath it stayed dark. The sheep did not glow. My own hands stayed in shadow. The light seemed to belong only to itself. It made no noise. The vibration under the ground did not seem to come from it. That was what made it worse. The sound was below me, but the light was above the trees, and the sheep faced outward as if watching all directions at once. I stood between the circle and the gate, unable to decide whether to run or stay with the flock. The light drifted left, very slowly. As it moved, the sheep turned their heads, not their bodies, just their heads, one by one, following it around the outside of the circle. The movement passed through the flock like a ripple. The animals on the far side looked up first, then those along the left, then the ones near me. Their bodies remained fixed, still facing outward from the circle, but their heads tilted to track the white shape over the tree line. I had never seen sheep move like that. Then the yard light at the house went out. I saw the hill above me go black. The kitchen window was still lit, a small yellow square, but the yard lamp was gone. Fionn stopped barking at the same time. I was alone with the sheep and the white thing over the trees. My torch died completely. I slapped it against my palm. Nothing. The darkness around me thickened at once. The sheep became pale shapes with black gaps between them. The white oval above the trees looked sharper now, or my eyes had adjusted. Something moved in the grass behind me. I turned. I couldn't see it, but I heard wet grass bending. A soft line of movement crossed the field between me and the gate. Not footsteps, no hoofbeats, no splashing in the mud, just grass folding and rising again. I backed toward the sheep without meaning to. They did not let me into the circle. The ones closest to me shifted just enough to keep the ring closed. Number 37 looked straight past me, ears forward, her eye reflecting the white oval above the forestry. I felt like I was standing outside a locked door. The movement in the grass stopped. The phone buzzed again. I did not take it out. The buzzing continued, longer than a normal call vibration, and then the phone grew warm against my thigh. Too warm. I pulled it from my pocket and dropped it in the grass. The screen was on, camera open. On the screen, the field was brighter than it was in real life, washed in a gray light. I could see the sheep circle perfectly, and beyond them the forestry. The white oval showed over the trees, but on the phone screen, it had 3 dark points inside it, arranged in a triangle. In the center of the sheep circle, something else showed. With my eyes, I saw only steam over flattened grass. On the phone, there was a dark vertical shape standing in the middle. Thin, taller than a man. Smooth, with no arms or legs I could make out. It stood inside the circle, facing no direction at all, because it had no clear front. The sheep surrounded it, all facing outward like guards. I looked up from the phone. The center of the circle was empty. I looked back down. The shape was closer to the edge of the screen, as if it had moved toward me. I left the phone in the grass and ran. I got maybe 20 yards before the ground dipped under my feet. Not a hole. The whole field seemed to sag for a second like soft rubber, then lift again. I fell on my hands and slid in mud. Behind me, the sheep made their first sound. One low, breathy bleat, then silence again. I pushed myself up and ran toward the gate. The yard light at the house came back on, buzzing weakly. The kitchen window looked farther away than it should have. The field seemed longer. I knew that slope like I knew my own stairs, and yet the gate did not get closer for several seconds. The low vibration followed me through the ground. At the gate, the latch would not lift. It was an ordinary metal field latch, one I had opened thousands of times. My muddy fingers slipped on it. I pulled, pushed, swore, tried again. It held shut as if welded. I climbed over instead, nearly falling into the track on the other side. The moment my boots hit the track, the vibration stopped. Sound rushed back. Fionn barking from the house, wind in the hedges, water running in the ditch, a ewe bleeding down in the field. Normal night sounds, all at once and too loud. I turned around. The sheep were no longer in a circle. They were scattered across the lower pasture, some grazing, some walking toward the wall, a few bunching near the gate like they wanted out. The white oval over the trees was gone. The steam was gone. The flattened circle was hard to see in the dark. My torch came back on in my hand. I hadn't realized I still had it. I stood there shaking until Fionn came flying down the track from the house, barking and whining and throwing herself against the gate. She wouldn't look at the sheep. She pressed against my legs, trembling so hard I could feel it through my trousers. I did not go back into the field. I went to the house, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table with Fionn under my chair. The radio was still on, but no music played. Just a soft static under the announcer's voice. I looked at the wall clock. It said 9:42. I had gone out at 9:13. It felt like 10 minutes, maybe 15. The landline phone lay on the floor below its cradle. The cord stretched tight. I didn't remember hearing it fall. I picked it up and put it back. The caller ID showed one outgoing call at 9:24. To my mobile. I didn't sleep. At first light, I went back down with Fionn on the lead, though she fought me halfway and then sat in the track, refusing to go through the gate. I left her there and walked into the field alone. The sheep were acting normal, which almost made it worse. They grazed around me. Number 37 shoved her nose into my pocket looking for feed. A few of them had mud on their knees. One had a scrape above her eye, nothing serious. The circle was still there. The grass in the middle of the field lay flattened in a perfect ring where the sheep had stood. Not an uneven, trampled mess. A ring with a clear, empty center. The grass inside the center was bent clockwise, smooth as if combed by a giant hand. In that center were 3 dry patches arranged in a triangle. The rest of the field was wet from the night's damp. The 3 patches were warm. I checked with my hand, then with the back of my fingers because I didn't trust myself. Warm. Dry. The soil around them felt normal, cold and muddy. Each patch had a narrow hole at its center, about the width of a pencil. I pushed a bit of broken twig into one. It went down all the way and slipped from my fingers. I never heard it hit bottom. My phone was lying where I had dropped it. The screen was cracked, but it still turned on. Battery at 71%, though it had been near dead the night before. Airplane mode was off. There were no photos from the field, no video, no incoming calls except one missed call from the house phone at 9:24. There was a new note in the Notes app. I did not write it. I almost never used that app. The note had no title. It contained one line. Flock maintained boundary. I deleted it right there in the field. Then I looked toward the forestry. On the fence at the far side, 3 strands of wire had sagged inward. Not broken, sagged, like they had heated and softened. The wooden posts on either side were fine. The grass beneath the sagging part was pressed flat in a circle that crossed under the fence and disappeared into the trees. I called Reese and asked him to come up. He arrived an hour later in his van, still wearing his plastering clothes and looking annoyed until he saw the field. He walked around the circle twice without saying much. He touched the dry patches. He looked at the holes. He checked the fence. "Sheep do this?" he asked. "No." "Could someone have come up here messing about?" "With what? In the dark? Without leaving boot prints?" He didn't answer. We walked to the forestry edge together. Fionn stayed by the gate and cried until we stopped, so I tied her to the post there. The fence sag was worse up close. The wire had small bright spots where the galvanizing looked polished clean. On the nearest wooden post, at about chest height, were 3 round marks in the moss, arranged in a triangle. Riss said, "Don't touch that." I hadn't planned to. Inside the forestry, the ground was dark and soft under the spruce. There should have been needles, twigs, old branches, all the usual mess. Instead, just beyond the fence, there was a clear, round patch where everything had been pressed down flat. No footprints, no tire marks, no sign of an animal path. In the middle of that patch was one of my sheep ear tags, yellow plastic, number 37. But the ewe was still in the field wearing both tags. I picked it up with my sleeve. The number was printed wrong, 73 instead of 37. Reese told me to put it down. I did. Neither of us reported anything. Report what, exactly? Strange light, silent sheep, grass circle, wrong ear tag? I phoned the vet about the flock just in case, and he came later that day. He found nothing wrong except that several sheep had slightly raised temperatures, and one had no milk in her udder despite not being in lamb. He shrugged and said animals did odd things when spooked. By evening, the circle had started to fade because the sheep walked through it and the grass lifted a bit. The 3 dry patches stayed dry until the next afternoon, even through more rain. That night, I brought the sheep into the upper field nearer the house. Fionn still wouldn't go near the lower gate. She would work every other part of the farm, but if I whistled her toward that pasture, she lowered herself to the ground and looked away like she hadn't heard me. 3 mornings later, I found the whole flock standing by the upper hedge. Not in a circle, just lined along the fence, shoulder to shoulder, facing outward toward the lane. Silent, completely silent. I followed their gaze and saw nothing at first, just mist over the track, the wall, the empty lane beyond. Then on the metal gate, 3 clean round marks appeared in the dew at eye level. I watched them form one by one. Then the house phone started ringing behind me. I was driving home on County Road 18 when the road markers ahead lit up like somebody had put bulbs inside them. It was a Tuesday night in February, a little before 11, and I was coming back from my aunt's place outside Lamar's, Iowa. She had slipped on her porch steps that afternoon. Not bad enough for the hospital, but bad enough that my mom guilted me into going over to salt the walkway and bring in firewood. By the time I left, the wind had picked up and the temperature had dropped into the teens. My name is Jonah Rask. I was 38 then, and I had been driving that road since high school. It ran between cornfields and low farm lots, mostly straight for miles, with ditches on both sides and no street lights once you got past the grain elevator. I liked it in daylight. At night in winter, it felt like a long black hallway. I was in my old Ford Ranger, the blue one with a heater that only worked if I kept it on the highest setting. The fan roared under the dashboard, and the windshield had a foggy band along the bottom where warm air met cold glass. I had one hand on the wheel, one hand wrapped around a gas station coffee I had bought, even though it tasted burned. The radio was playing low, some overnight call-in show about property taxes, and I remember being annoyed because the host kept letting people ramble. The road was dry but crusted with salt. Snow sat in the fields in long dirty strips blown flat by the wind. The sky had cleared, so every farm light stood out sharp. I could see the red blink of a radio tower miles away and the tiny white yard lights around distant barns. Nothing about the night felt strange at first. It was just cold, boring driving. About 5 miles south of Merrill, I came over the small rise near the abandoned seed building. That was where I first noticed the reflectors. The road had those raised reflective markers along the center line and the right shoulder. They usually caught your headlights in little flashes as you drove, orange on one side, white on the other, nothing special. But the ones ahead of me were glowing far brighter than they should have been, not just the nearest markers. A whole stretch of them, maybe half a mile down the road, was lit up at once. They looked like a dotted runway. At first I thought there was another vehicle coming toward me, maybe just over the next rise, headlights reflecting back from the markers. But there were no headlights, no glow on the horizon, no engine, no movement. Just the markers themselves shining bright white and amber in two perfect lines. I slowed a little. The moment my truck got close to the first bright marker, it went normal. It didn't switch off like a light. It just became an ordinary reflector again, dull and small in my headlights. Then the next one did the same as I reached it. Bright ahead, normal under me, bright ahead, normal under me. I told myself it was the angle of the road. That made sense for about 10 seconds. Roads dipped. Headlights hit things in strange ways. Cold air warped distance. I had been tired and staring at the same two lanes for too long. Then the shoulder posts joined in. The plastic reflector posts along the ditch, the ones with little red and white strips near the top, started glowing too. Not in my headlight beam, far beyond it. They lit up in a line on both sides of the road, hundreds of feet ahead, so bright I could see the black posts below them. My headlights were nowhere near them yet. I looked down at my dashboard. My high beams were off. I clicked them on and off anyway. The glowing markers did not change. The radio went to static. Not full static. The host's voice stayed under it, stretched and weak like he was talking from the bottom of a pipe. I reached for the volume knob and turned it down. The static kept going at the same level for another second after the knob clicked off, then faded. That was the first moment I felt that tight little warning in my chest. I checked my mirrors. Behind me was empty road, black fields, the faint red of the tower far back. Ahead, the markers kept glowing in a long straight run, brighter than any normal reflection. The road itself remained dark. The ditches were dark, the fields were dark. Only the reflective bits shone. I considered turning around at the next farm entrance, but that part of Road 18 didn't have many turnoffs. Snow had been plowed into ridges along the edges, and the ditches were deep. So I kept going, slower now, maybe 30. The truck felt normal. Steering fine, engine steady. Heater screaming. But outside the night had gone too clean. The wind that had been nudging the truck across the lane stopped. The loose snow that usually skated across the pavement stopped. I could see a few dry bits of cornstalk in the road, and they lay completely still. Then every reflector ahead blinked out at once. The road went black, except for my headlights. I hit the brake, harder than I meant to. The rear tires slid a little on salt grit before catching. My coffee tipped in the cup holder and splashed my hand. I cursed, more from the burn than fear. The markers came back. Not all at once this time. One after another, starting far ahead and moving toward me, like something invisible was passing over them and turning them on in sequence. A wave of light ran down both sides of the road and the center line until it reached my truck. As it passed under me, my dashboard lights dimmed. The heater fan slowed to almost nothing. The headlights softened to a weak yellow. For 1 second, the engine sounded far away, like it was running in another room. Then everything came back. I pulled over as much as I could without sliding into the ditch and stopped with the truck half on the shoulder. I put it in park and sat there with the engine running. The glowing markers ahead stayed bright. I took my phone from the cup holder. It had no service, which happens sometimes out there, but not usually. The battery was at 17%. It had been around 60 when I left my aunt's. I opened the camera and aimed through the windshield. On the screen, the road looked normal. No glowing markers, just darkness, my headlights, a faint yellow center line, and the first few reflectors close to the truck. I lowered the phone and looked with my eyes. The whole road ahead was still lit in dotted lines, stretching into the dark. I lifted the phone again. Normal. I took a photo anyway. The phone froze. The screen stayed on the camera view, but nothing moved. The heater noise continued, the engine idled, and outside the markers glowed. My phone showed a still image of the road with no glow. I pressed the side button. Nothing. Pressed it again. Nothing. Something tapped the passenger window. 3 soft taps. I turned so fast the seatbelt locked across my chest. There was nothing outside the passenger side except the snow ridge and the ditch beyond it. The window had fogged at the edges from my breath. In the fog were 3 clear circles arranged in a triangle, each about the size of a quarter. I did not move. Another 3 taps came from the rear window. I kept staring forward. The markers ahead looked brighter now. So did the ones behind me in the mirror. They formed 2 glowing corridors stretching both directions away from the truck. It felt less like I was on a road, and more like I had stopped in the middle of something laid out for a purpose I didn't understand. I put the truck back in drive. The gear shift felt stiff, but it moved. I eased off the brake. The truck rolled forward. The glowing markers went normal as I reached them, just like before. A bright white bead would sit ahead of me, too bright for its size, then shrink back to a regular reflector as the bumper passed it. The ones behind me in the mirror stayed dark for a few seconds, then lit up again after I had gone past. That was when I realized the glow was following me. Not exactly following. More like there was a bright zone around the road that kept a fixed distance ahead and behind my truck, while the markers right beside me stayed normal. I sped up to 40. The zone moved with me. I slowed to 20. It stayed with me. My phone came back on in my hand. The screen showed 11:17. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:17. I had left my aunt's at 10:36. I should have been almost home by then, or at least past the Merrill turn. I was still on the same straight stretch by the seed building, or it looked that way. The road ahead had no turn, no farm drive, no mile marker, just glowing reflectors vanishing into black. I told myself I had misjudged the distance. I had been distracted. I had pulled over longer than I thought. Then I passed the abandoned seed building again. It stood on the right this time, not the left, which made no sense. A squat metal building with part of the roof peeled back. The old Northridge Seed sign faded to almost nothing. I had passed it before the markers started glowing. It should have been behind me on the left. Now it slid past my passenger window, close enough that my headlights caught the broken loading dock and the snow piled against the door. I whispered, "No." The radio turned on by itself. It did not play the call-in show. It played a low tone, steady and deep, not loud but heavy. It came through the speakers and through the floor at the same time. My coffee trembled in the cup holder, sending tiny ripples to the edge. The reflective markers ahead started changing color. The whites became blue-white. The amber ones turned a dull red. The shoulder posts glowed pale green, which they should not have been able to do because they were just plastic with reflective strips. The colors were faint at first, then clearer, laying out the road in a strange pattern. 3 red markers on the center line, 3 green posts on the right, 3 blue-white reflectors on the left, then a gap, then the same pattern again. I tried to call my wife, Lyanne. The phone showed no service, but the call screen opened anyway. It rang once, not through the phone speaker, but through the truck speakers, loud and flat. Then Leanne answered, "Jonah?" I almost sagged with relief. "I'm on County 18. Something's wrong with the road." There was a delay. "Jonah? Can you hear me?" The tone under the call deepened. Her voice came again, but it sounded different. Too even. "Do not stop between the markers." I looked at the glowing lines ahead. "What?" "Do not stop between the markers," she repeated. The call ended. I stared at the screen. It still showed no service. The call log later had nothing there, but at that moment, the phone displayed the call duration as 0417 and would not change. Something moved in the field to my left. I didn't see an animal or a person. I saw the reflectors on that side vanish in a narrow vertical strip as something dark passed between them and me. It moved parallel to the truck, keeping pace for maybe 5 seconds. The snow behind it looked slightly brighter around its edges, like the darkness had a shape but no surface. I pressed the gas. The Ranger resisted. The engine revved, but the truck felt heavy, like I was dragging a trailer with its brakes locked. I got up to 35, then 40, but it took too long. The glowing markers slid past slower than they should have. The road dipped. There was no dip there. I knew the road. It was flat until the creek bridge a mile north. but the hood angled downward and the headlights pointed at pavement that seemed to slope into a shallow hollow. The bright markers ahead curved down with it. At the bottom, the road surface looked wrong, dry. The rest of the pavement had salt grit and thin patches of frozen damp. This lower section was clean black asphalt, dry and smooth with no tire tracks. The glowing markers around it were the brightest yet. They reflected not just toward me, but upward, little points of hard light in the dark. I reached the bottom of the dip, and the truck died. Engine off, heater off, dash black. The headlights stayed on. I coasted maybe 10 feet and stopped without touching the brake. It felt like the truck had settled into soft mud, but the road was dry and solid. The low tone continued. I tried the key. Nothing. Tried again. The starter didn't click. The dashboard remained dead. My phone went black in my lap. Outside, all the glowing road markers went out except the ones forming a circle around the truck. I had not seen them arranged that way while driving. But now, in the darkness, I saw reflectors in the road and along the shoulder shining in a perfect ring around me. Some were normal road markers. Some had no business being there. Small reflective points dotted the asphalt in places where no markers should have been installed, forming a circle maybe 30 feet across. My truck sat in the middle. The 3 clear circles on the passenger window fogged over again, then reappeared. A soft scraping sound moved along the roof. I looked up without wanting to. The headliner was stained from an old leak above the driver's visor. A faint bulge appeared in the fabric, then smoothed out. It moved from the front of the cab toward the rear window, slow and careful, like something pressing down from above without denting the metal. I grabbed the door handle. It wouldn't open. The lock was up. I pulled again. Nothing. Passenger door? Same. I leaned back and kicked the driver's door once stupidly and hurt my heel. The windshield began to frost from the outside, not evenly. 3 round spots near the top cleared as the rest frosted over. The circles were arranged in a triangle, right above my line of sight. Through them, I could see the road ahead. A white light had appeared above the far end of the hollow. It hung low over the road, beyond the ring of reflectors, not bright enough to light the fields or the truck hood, but clear and solid against the black. It had the shape of a flattened oval, smooth and dull, with no beam, no flash, no visible source. It looked like a piece of the moon had been cut out and lowered over the road, except the moon was nowhere in sight. The tone did not come from above it. It still came from below the road. The pavement around the truck started clicking. 1 marker clicked, then another, then another. Tiny hard sounds all around the circle, like fingernails tapping glass. The reflectors blinked in groups of 3. 3 on the left, 3 behind, 3 ahead, 3 on the right. The white oval lowered. I couldn't tell distance. It might have been hundreds of yards away or just past the hood. My eyes had trouble holding it in place. The object did not grow larger, but it felt closer, the way a storm can feel close before it reaches you. The radio crackled. My own voice came through. I heard myself say, "I'm on County 18. Something's wrong with the road." Then Leanne's voice, flat and delayed, "Do not stop between the markers." Then another voice under hers, low and rough, not words at first. Just a dragging sound through the speakers. It slowly became something like speech. Observer contained. I turned the radio knob off, but the words continued for another second. The reflector circle went dark, all at once. The only light was the white oval ahead and my weak headlights, which now looked yellow and old. The fields beyond them were empty. No farm lights, no radio tower, no stars. Even the snow seemed absent, like the world outside the road had been erased. Then, from my left, came the sound of sheep. That made no sense. There were no sheep farms there, mostly corn and soybeans. But I heard soft animal breaths and hooves shifting, many of them just beyond the driver's door. Not bleating, just a crowded living sound inches away from the truck. I held still and listened. The white oval flickered once. In that flicker, I saw shapes outside the driver's window. Not sheep, not people. Thin, upright, dark forms lined along the edge of the road, facing the truck, or maybe facing away. They were only visible for a fraction of a second, black against deeper black, and then the oval steadied, and they were gone. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and said Leanne's name. I don't know why. She was 20 miles away, probably asleep, probably with her phone on the nightstand. The truck horn sounded. I hadn't touched it. It gave one long, weak note that faded downward as if the battery were dying. The sound rolled out into the dark and came back wrong, echoing 3 times from different distances. The white oval moved over the road. It did not fly toward me. It slid, silent and smooth, following the line of glowing markers that had gone dark. As it passed over each road marker, the marker lit up underneath it, not reflecting my headlights but glowing from within for 1 second. Then the marker went black again. It came closer. My headlights shut off. The cab filled with a dull white light that had no direction. It did not cast my shadow. It did not brighten the dashboard exactly. It just made everything visible in a flat way. The cracked vinyl steering wheel, the coffee stain on my sleeve, the dust on the passenger seat, the 3 clear circles in the window. The door handle moved. Down. Up. The passenger handle moved next. Down. Up. The locks stayed up. The doors stayed shut. I heard the tailgate latch click once behind me, then the fuel door pop open with a small metallic ping. I shut my eyes. The low vibration rose through the seat, up my spine, into my jaw. My teeth hurt. My ears popped. I could smell hot dust and cold metal. Something tapped the windshield from outside, exactly 3 times. When I opened my eyes, the white light was gone. The truck was running. The heater blasted hot air. The radio was off. The headlights were on high beam, aimed down the flat road. The glowing markers ahead were normal reflectors again, only visible where my lights reached them. I was parked on the shoulder beside the creek bridge, not in a hollow, not by the seed building, not in the middle of the road. The bridge rail was right ahead of me, painted white and peeling, with snow packed along its base. I knew that bridge. It was about 4 miles north of where I had first noticed the markers. The dashboard clock said 12:03. My phone said 12:03. I had lost almost 40 minutes. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, too scared to drive and too scared to stay. A pickup passed in the opposite lane, hauling a flatbed trailer. The driver didn't slow, didn't look over. Normal headlights, normal engine, normal tires, hissing over salted pavement. That helped enough that I put the truck in drive. It moved normally. I drove home at 30 miles an hour, hazards on, for no good reason. The road markers behaved like road markers. The radio tower blinked red where it should. Farm lights came back in the distance. At the edge of town, my phone buzzed with 3 messages from Leanne. The first said, "Are you almost home?" The second said, "Call me." The third said, "Why did you just call from the landline?" We did not have a landline. When I got home, Leanne was standing on the porch in her robe and winter boots, holding her phone. She looked angry until she saw my face. She said I had called her at 11:17. The caller ID showed our old house number from before we bought the place, the disconnected line that hadn't worked in years. She answered because it scared her. She said all she heard was static and a low tone. Then my voice came through, but it sounded far away. "What did I say?" I asked. She looked past me toward the truck. "You said not to stop between the markers." I told her that was what her voice had said to me. She shook her head and crossed her arms tight around herself. I didn't say anything. I kept asking where you were. I did not sleep much. At daylight, I went out to check the truck. Liane came with me because she didn't want me outside alone, though neither of us said that directly. The Ranger looked normal at first. Salt on the doors, mud on the tires, coffee spilled in the cup holder. Then I saw the roof. 3 round, clean spots marked the dirty blue paint above the cab, arranged in a triangle. Each was about the size of a dinner plate. The metal inside the circles looked slightly lighter than the rest, and when I touched one, it was warm. It was 9 degrees outside. Liane said, "Don't touch it." "Touch it." I pulled my hand back. The passenger window had 3 small, clear circles in the frost. The windshield had the same. The fuel door was open. When I checked inside, the gas cap was hanging loose on its tether, and the area around the filler neck had a fine gray dust on it. I wiped some onto a paper towel. It looked like ash, but felt gritty, almost like powdered glass. That afternoon, I drove back to County Road 18 with my brother-in-law, Calvin. He was a sheriff's deputy in Plymouth County, off duty that day, and he came because Leanne called him before I could talk her out of it. He didn't laugh at me, but he had the careful quiet of someone waiting for a normal explanation. We found the seed building, we found the stretch of road, We found the creek bridge. No hollow, no strange markers in a circle, no burn marks, no obvious signs of anything. Then Calvin noticed the reflectors. On a straight section about half a mile south of the creek bridge, several raised road markers were new. Not officially new, according to him, because the county hadn't done any work there in winter. But they looked cleaner than the rest, brighter than, with no salt crust or tire scuffs. They formed part of a curve across the lane, not following the road line at all. Only 6 of them were there, enough to suggest a circle, not enough to complete one. Calvin crouched by one and tried to pry it with his pocket knife. It wouldn't move. He scraped the edge and frowned. "This isn't county hardware," he said. "What is it?" "I don't know." A truck came along then, so we stepped back into the ditch. As it passed, its headlights hit the odd markers. For 1 second, they lit up too bright, much brighter than the normal center reflectors. Calvin saw it. He stood there with his hands on his hips until the truck disappeared over the rise. Then he said, "I'm not writing this up." I didn't ask him to. 3 days later, the markers were gone. Not removed with gouges or patches left behind. Gone. The asphalt where they had been was smooth and unmarked, as if they had never been installed. Calvin drove out himself to check and called me from the road. While we were on the phone, his voice cut out. The line filled with a low tone. Then I heard 3 little taps, clear as fingernails on glass, and the call ended. When he called back, 5 minutes later, he said his cruiser clock had jumped to 12:03. He told me he was going home. I woke up because the crickets stopped. That was the first thing I noticed before I knew I was awake. The room was dark. The sheet was twisted around my legs, and the fan on my dresser was still turning on low. But the sound outside had been cut off so cleanly that my eyes opened on their own. I lived on the edge of Stillwater, Oklahoma, in a little rental house behind a row of pecan trees. It was August, hot enough that the walls held the heat all night, and my window had been open because the old air conditioner in the living room barely reached the bedroom. Most nights the backyard was loud. Crickets, tree frogs, cicadas, dogs barking 2 streets over, trucks on the county road. It was the kind of noise I didn't hear unless it stopped. That night it stopped all at once. My name is Caleb Rains. I was 31 then, working at a tire shop on Perkins Road and taking classes online because I kept telling myself I was going to do something else with my life. I wasn't into UFO stuff. I wasn't scared of the dark. I was mostly scared of rent, dental bills, and my truck not passing inspection. I lay there for a few seconds staring toward the open window. The curtains were cheap white ones my sister had given me, and they hung still. No breeze moved them. Outside, the backyard was black except for a little gray light from the sky and the square of my neighbor's porch light through the trees. The silence felt thick. I sat up on one elbow. The digital clock on my dresser said 2:13. The fan made a soft clicking sound every time it turned past a certain point. Other than that, nothing. No insects, no frogs, no traffic. Not even the low hum from the electrical substation down the road that I usually heard when the wind came from the south. I remember whispering, "What?" I don't know why. I guess I expected the crickets to start again as soon as I spoke, like I had caught the night doing something, and it needed to act normal. They didn't. Then the dog next door started whining. His name was Buster, a big yellow dog that belonged to my neighbor, Linda Cross. He barked at everything. Squirrels, trash trucks, me carrying groceries, wind in the pecan trees. But this wasn't barking. It was a thin, tucked down sound, like he was under a bed somewhere. I could barely hear it through the open window. I got up and stepped around a pile of laundry on the floor. The wood boards were warm under my feet. That stuck with me later because they shouldn't have been warm at 2 a.m, not like that. The room itself was stuffy, but the floor felt like it had sunlight in it. I pulled the curtain aside. The backyard looked normal at first. Patchy grass, the chain link fence, the old metal clothesline pole, my plastic trash bin beside the shed. The pecan trees stood along the back fence in dark clumps. No wind, no movement. Then the porch light next door dimmed. It didn't go out, it just lowered, like someone had turned a knob. The whole yard became darker by a small amount. Buster stopped whining in the same second. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I turned around because the sound made me jump. The screen lit up, but there was no notification, no text, no call, nothing. It showed the lock screen and the time, 2:13. Then the airplane mode symbol appeared at the top. I had not touched it. I picked it up and swiped. The phone lagged, then opened to the home screen. Airplane mode was on. Wi-Fi off, Bluetooth off. I tapped the airplane icon to turn it off. It slid back on by itself. That made me more annoyed than scared at first, the way bad electronics do when you're half asleep. I tapped it again. Same thing. Off for maybe half a second, then on. Outside, something passed over the roof. I didn't hear it coming. There was no engine, no rush of air, no thump. I knew it passed because the ceiling changed. A faint glow moved across it from the front of the house to the back. Soft white, not bright enough to light the room, just enough to make the texture in the plaster show for a second. It slid over the ceiling like headlights from a car, except my bedroom window faced the backyard and the road was out front. Also, it moved too slowly for a passing car and too evenly from one side of the ceiling to the other. I froze with the phone in my hand. The glow crossed the room, touched the top of the dresser, then slipped out through the back wall. A second later, the crickets started again. Not gradually, all at once. The yard filled with sound like someone had unmuted it. Crickets, frogs, a faraway dog, a truck engine on the county road. The neighbor's porch light brightened back to normal. My phone dropped airplane mode by itself and showed 2 bars. I stood there for a while, listening to the ordinary noise outside and feeling stupid. I told myself it had been a helicopter, even though I hadn't heard one. Or a car turning around in the alley, even though there wasn't an alley. Or maybe I had dreamed the silence and woken during some weird half-sleep thing. The phone could have glitched. The porch light could have dipped because of power. Everything could be explained if I didn't hold the pieces too close together. I went back to bed and did not sleep much. The next morning, I found Buster in Linda's driveway when I left for work. He was sitting by her front tire, staring up at my roof. Usually he ran to the fence and barked at me. That morning, he didn't make a sound. Linda came out in a robe and flip-flops with a mug of coffee. She was in her late 50s, smoked too much, and knew everything that happened on the block. "You hear that last night?" she asked. I had my truck door open. "Hear what?" "That quiet." I turned back toward her. She took a sip of coffee and looked embarrassed, which wasn't like her. Sounded like the whole yard shut off. "What time?" She shrugged. "Little after 2, Buster woke me up. I asked if she saw anything. She looked up at my house, then hers. Light on the roof, just a little one. Thought maybe a patrol car turned around, but there wasn't one." I nodded like that made sense. She said power flickered too. Microwave clock reset. Mine hadn't. I had checked it while making coffee. The stove, microwave, and wall clock were all normal. At work, I kept thinking about it. I was rotating tires on a Silverado, and the air gun sounded too loud in my hands. Every time the shop went quiet between cars, I felt myself listening for crickets, even though it was daytime, and I was inside a garage. Around lunch, my coworker Deshaun asked if I was hungover. I said I didn't sleep. That evening, I checked around the house, not because I expected to find anything, more because I didn't like having done nothing. The roof was too steep for me to climb safely, so I walked the yard looking at shingles from below. Nothing obvious. No burn marks, no broken limbs, no drones stuck in the gutter. But the grass under my bedroom window was dry. That might not sound strange in August, but the rest of the yard still had some dampness from the sprinkler I had run the evening before. Under the window, there was an oval patch about 6 feet long, about 6 feet pale and brittle. Not dead, exactly, just drained. I stepped into it and felt warmth through my shoes. I knelt and touched the ground. Warm. The soil outside the patch was cooler and slightly damp. Inside the patch, the dirt was dry as powder. In the middle were 3 small round spots, each about the size of a coffee mug, darker than the grass around them. They were arranged in a triangle. I stood up too fast and got lightheaded. Linda was watching from her driveway. "You see it?" she asked. I didn't answer. She crossed her arms. "Same in my yard." I walked over and she showed me a patch near her back fence, smaller than mine, but the same shape. Dry oval. 3 darker spots. Buster refused to come near it. He stood at the end of his chain with his ears back and his tail tucked, whining under his breath. Linda said, "I'm calling the city if it happens again." I asked. And say what? She didn't have an answer. It did happen again. The next night was hotter. I left the window open anyway because I wanted to know, which was a stupid thing to want. But there it was. I told myself I would stay awake until 2 and see if the crickets stopped. I made coffee at 10, watched half a movie on my laptop, then sat in bed with the lights off and my phone in my hand. At 2:12, the fan slowed. Not stopped. Slowed like the power feeding it had weakened. The room got very quiet, but the crickets were still going outside. I sat up and watched the window. At 2:13, the insects stopped. Same as before. Instant silence. My phone switched to airplane mode in my hand. I watched it happen. The little icon appeared at the top of the screen without me touching anything. The screen brightness lowered on its own until I could barely see it. I got up and went to the window. The backyard was still. Buster was not whining this time. I could see him through the chain-link fence while standing in Linda's yard with his head pointed toward the sky. His mouth was open. No sound came out. A low vibration began under the house. It was so faint I thought at first it was my own heartbeat. Then the floorboards trembled lightly under my feet. The dresser mirror gave one soft tick against the wall. The pull chain on the ceiling fan, which wasn't running, swayed maybe half an inch and stopped. The glow appeared before it reached the roof. I saw it through the top part of the window, a soft white smear above the pecan trees. It wasn't bright like a spotlight. It didn't light the yard. The fence stayed dark. The shed stayed dark. But the glow itself was clear, hovering beyond the trees, moving slowly from left to right. I held my breath. As it moved over the house, the ceiling brightened again. The same faint wash of white slid across the plaster. This time, it paused, right above my room. The glow held there for maybe 10 seconds. The vibration got stronger, not enough to shake things off shelves, but enough that I felt it in my teeth. My phone screen went black. The fan stopped. The air in the room warmed in a sudden layer against my face. Then something tapped the window. 3 soft taps. I stepped back so fast I hit the bed frame. The window was open, but the screen was closed. Nothing was outside that I could see. No hand, no branch, no bug big enough to make that sound. On the screen mesh, 3 round dark spots appeared, arranged in a triangle, like something warm had touched the dust and cleared it. The glow moved on. The ceiling dimmed. The fan restarted. The phone came back to life. The crickets resumed all at once. The clock still said 2:13. I knew at least a minute had passed. Maybe more. I checked my phone, 2:13. I watched the seconds. They moved from 42 to 59, then back to 00, but the minute stayed at 2:13 for another full cycle before jumping to 2:15. I did not sleep after that. I sat in the living room with the lights on until sunrise, holding a baseball bat I had not touched since college. Around 5:30, Linda knocked on my front door. Her hair was flattened on one side, and she had a cigarette in her hand even though she hadn't lit it. "You were up," she said. "Yeah." "You see it?" "Some of it." She nodded. "Buster won't go outside now." We walked around both houses after the sun came up. The dry patch under my bedroom window was bigger, hers too. The 3 darker spots in mine had turned almost black, but they didn't smell burned. The soil was still warm. We checked the roof from the street and saw nothing except normal shingles. Then Linda noticed the power line. It ran from the pole behind her house across my yard to my weatherhead. 3 little plastic spacers near the line had warped. Not melted enough to fail, just bent inward in the same direction. The insulation around the line looked fine, but the spacers had softened like old wax. I called the electric company. A lineman named Roy came out that afternoon. He was polite, sunburned, and clearly thought we were overreacting until he saw the spacers. He checked the line, the meter, the pole transformer, all of it. He said everything tested normal. "What could bend them like that?" I asked. "Heat," he said. "From what?" He looked at the roof, then the yard, then the sky, even though it was broad daylight. "Hard to say." Linda asked if a surge could make the crickets stop. Roy gave her a look, then looked away because he didn't want to get involved. That night, I closed the window. I also slept at my sister Molly's apartment across town. I told her the house was too hot and I needed real air conditioning. She didn't believe me, but she let me take the couch. At 2:13, I woke up in her living room. The apartment was silent. No traffic outside. No refrigerator hum. No upstairs footsteps. Her cat, Pickle, stood on the back of the couch with his tail puffed, staring at the ceiling. My phone sat on the coffee table. Airplane mode was on. I did not hear crickets because Molly lived near a busy road, but I knew the silence was the same. It had the same pressure in it. I got up carefully and walked to the balcony door. From the third floor, I could see the apartment parking lot, the convenience store at the corner, and the dark line of trees beyond the drainage ditch. A faint glow moved over the trees. It was far away, maybe in the direction of my house. Maybe not. It was low, white, smooth, and dull. It slid behind the roofline of the building across the lot without casting light on anything. A row of parked cars below remained dark. Then it paused, not over me, farther out. The cat hissed. My phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up, showing an incoming call from Linda. Airplane mode still showed at the top. I answered before I thought better of it. No voice came through at first, just a low vibration, like a truck idling under concrete. Then Linda whispered, "It's over your place again." "I'm not there," I said. A pause. "I know." The way she said it made my scalp tighten. "What do you mean?" She breathed hard into the phone. "Your bedroom light is on." "I'm at Molly's." "I know. My bedroom light can't be on. I turned everything off." I can see someone standing in the window. I did not speak. The glow outside the apartment began moving again, slowly, silently. My phone warmed against my ear. Linda said, "Caleb?" I could barely get the word out. "What?" "It's not facing out." The call cut off. The apartment sounds returned. Refrigerator, traffic, a door closing somewhere downstairs. Pickle jumped off the couch and ran down the hall. I drove to my house at sunrise with Molly following in her car because she refused to let me go alone after I told her what Linda said. My bedroom light was off when we got there. The front door was locked. Nothing seemed disturbed inside. But the bed was made. I had not made it before leaving. I never made my bed. The sheet and quilt were pulled tight, pillows centered, corners tucked badly but deliberately. On the windowsill, inside the room, were 3 clean circles in the dust. Molly stood in the doorway and said, "I don't like this." Neither did I. Linda came over when she saw our cars. She looked exhausted. She said she had watched my house from her kitchen after the call dropped. The glow over the roof had lasted less than a minute, same as before. When it passed, the crickets came back. My bedroom light went out. She did not see the person leave the window. "Was it me?" I asked. She rubbed her face. "I don't know." "Linda?" She looked at me then. "It was your shape," she said, "but it stood too still." I stayed at Molly's again the next night and the night after that. Nothing happened there. My phone behaved. The city noises kept going. Pickle slept normally. For a few days, I convinced myself it was over. When I finally slept at home again, I kept the window closed and the curtains shut. I put my phone in the kitchen and unplugged the fan. I also set an old digital recorder on the dresser because some part of me wanted proof, even though another part of me wanted nothing recorded ever. I woke at 2:13. The room was silent. No fan this time. No open window. No crickets through the glass. But I could feel the absence of sound pressing against the walls. The air was warm. Too warm. I sat up and looked at the curtains. A faint white glow moved across them from left to right. It didn't shine through like headlights. It seemed to sit on the fabric itself, a soft smear traveling along the folds. It slowed at the center of the window. The recorder on the dresser clicked on by itself. Its tiny red light glowed. I reached for the lamp, but the switch did nothing. From outside, through the closed window, came 3 taps. Then, from the bedroom door behind me, 3 taps answered. I turned slowly. The door was open a crack. I always slept with it closed because the hallway light from the smoke detector bothered me. Through the crack, I could see the dark hallway and a faint square of kitchen light from the microwave clock. The taps came again from the door, lower this time. I got out of bed and pushed it shut. Something on the other side pushed back. Not hard, just enough that the door resisted my hand. I shoved with my shoulder and got it closed. The latch clicked. The knob moved once, slowly, then stopped. The glow passed over the ceiling again. The low vibration started beneath the floor, deeper than before. The dresser mirror ticked against the wall. The window glass fogged from the outside, even though the night was hot. 3 clear circles formed in the fog at eye level. I backed into the corner by the closet. The recorder played a voice. Mine. It came from the dresser speaker, low and calm, not panicked like I was. I am in the room. I covered my ears, but I still heard it. The voice repeated, I am in the room. The glow faded. The crickets came back outside, muffled through the closed window, but sudden and loud. The lamp turned on. The hallway beyond the bedroom door was quiet. The phone in the kitchen chimed with a notification. The clock said 2:16. I stood there until my legs stopped shaking, then opened the door. Nothing was in the hall, nothing in the living room. The front and back doors were locked. My phone was on the kitchen counter, airplane mode off, battery at 83%. There was one new voice memo. It was 3 seconds long. When I played it, there was only the low vibration, and then my voice whispering, not facing out. I moved out a week later. Molly helped. Linda watched from her porch with Buster sitting between her feet. The dry patch under my bedroom window never grew back right. The grass stayed pale even after rain. The 3 dark spots faded, but when the sun hit them at an angle, you could still see where they had been. On the last load, I went back inside alone to check the bedroom. Empty room. Nail holes in the wall. Dust line where the dresser had stood. Closed window. The crickets were loud outside even though it was late afternoon. On the bare windowsill in the dust that had settled after moving furniture, 3 fresh circles had appeared. I wiped them away with my thumb. The glass warmed under my hand. I found the white pictures on the north camera after dinner, when I was sitting at my kitchen table with mud still drying on my boots. My name is Simon Vale, and at the time I was helping my cousin Marin keep an eye on her property outside Sandpoint, Idaho. She had 30 acres that backed up to timber company land, and something had been getting into her chicken feed at night. She thought it was raccoons. Her husband, Luke, thought it was a black bear. I mostly thought they both wanted an excuse to buy more trail cameras. I had put 6 of them out along the old logging road and the lower creek 2 weeks before. Nothing fancy, just camo plastic boxes strapped to trees with bungee cords. They had night vision, motion sensors, temperature stamps, and little memory cards that always felt too small in my fingers when I had to change them in the cold. That evening was damp and gray. It had rained most of the afternoon, and by the time I hiked out to pull the cards, mist had started rising off the low ground. Not thick fog exactly, more like the air had gone wet enough that the trees looked farther away than they were. The sun was dropping behind the ridge, and everything smelled like cedar, mud, and rotting leaves. I went alone because it was supposed to be quick. Marin was making dinner, Luke was fixing a loose gutter, and I told them I'd be back in half an hour. I had my headlamp, a pocket knife, spare cards, and a little plastic case to keep the used ones dry. The first 2 cameras were normal. One near the chicken run had 12 pictures of raccoons, which made Marin right. Another by the old fence had a deer staring straight into the lens like it had been personally offended. The 3rd camera, down by the creek crossing, had nothing but branches moving in the wind. The north camera was the last one. It sat about 50 yards past the creek, strapped to a fir tree that leaned over the logging road. I had put it there because the muddy track narrowed between 2 big stumps, and anything moving along that side of the property would probably pass through. There was another camera just uphill from it, maybe 50 yards away, aimed at the same stretch from a different angle. When I reached the north camera, I noticed the strap was loose. Not undone, just loosened enough that the camera had sagged forward and tilted slightly toward the ground. I thought maybe a deer had bumped it or the bark had shifted after the rain. I straightened it, popped the latch, swapped the card, and wiped water off the casing with my sleeve. Then I heard a click from uphill. It was soft, but in the quiet woods it stood out. One click, like plastic closing. I looked toward the upper camera. Nothing moved. The trees stood black and wet, and the ground was covered in ferns and old needles. My headlamp caught droplets on branches, but no eyeshine, no animal, no person. I called out, "Luke?" No answer. That was the first weird thing, though it didn't feel like much at the time. Trail cameras clicked sometimes. Branches snapped. Little sounds came from nowhere in the woods. I had lived around enough rural places not to make a ghost out of every noise. Still, I walked back faster than I'd walked in. At the house, dinner was ready. We ate at the counter because Marin had seed catalogs spread across the kitchen table. Luke asked if I saw bear tracks. I said no, just raccoons and a loose strap. He made a joke about raccoons learning how to sabotage evidence. After we ate, I put the cards into my laptop one by one. The first cards were exactly what I expected. Raccoons, deer, one coyote at 2:13 in the morning, a blurred owl wing, raindrops glowing in infrared. We all leaned over the screen at first, then Marin got bored and started washing dishes. Luke stayed because he liked seeing wildlife but pretended he didn't. The North camera card had 143 images. The first 90 or so were normal. Squirrels, blowing branches, a few dark empty shots triggered by rain. Then at 4:17 a.m. the images turned completely white. Not overexposed with trees faintly visible. Not fogged. Not a flash reflecting off something. White. Solid white from edge to edge. The timestamp on the first white image was 0473. The next was 448, then 413. Every 5 seconds, another white frame. It continued for exactly 90 seconds. At 4833, the images went back to normal. The next frame showed the logging road in infrared again. Wet ground, tree trunks, ferns, the two stumps. No animal, no person. Nothing in the frame that should have caused it. Luke said, "Bad card." "Maybe," I said, but the timestamps bothered me. The camera had triggered every 5 seconds, like something in front of it kept activating the sensor. A bad card usually corrupted files randomly or made them unreadable. These were perfectly recorded images, just all white. I opened the card from the upper camera. That camera was only 50 yards away, aimed down at almost the same area from the slope. If something bright had lit the woods for a minute and a half, it should have seen it. At 4:17, it recorded nothing. Nothing. No trigger. No white frames. The last image before that was a deer at 3:52. The next was me walking past at 6:41 p.m. to collect the card. The creek camera also recorded nothing unusual. The chicken run camera had raccoons around 4:10 and one empty rain-triggered shot at 4:25. Only the north camera showed the white sequence. Marin came over drying her hands on a towel. Could headlights do that? There's no road there. ATV? Not without the other camera seeing it. Luke leaned closer to the screen. Maybe someone walked right up to it with a flashlight. I clicked through the frames again. White, 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 white. The whole screen had the same flat brightness. No shadow from someone standing close. No shape. No hand over the lens. If someone was close enough to do that, I said, why didn't it get them walking up or away? Luke didn't answer. I checked the metadata. Temperature at 4:73 was 46 degrees. At 08, it showed 88 degrees. Then 88 on every frame. At 4 in every white frame. At 4:33, when the picture went normal again, it dropped back to 46. That made all three of us quiet. The camera itself measured temperature inside the casing. It shouldn't have jumped 40 degrees in 5 seconds and then back down again. Not unless the camera had been heated directly and then cooled just as fast. Luke said, "Bring that camera in tomorrow." I said I would. I didn't sleep well. I was staying in Marin's guest room above the garage, and the rain ticked on the metal roof most of the night. Around 3:30, I woke up without knowing why. The room was dark except for the red numbers on the alarm clock, and the house was completely quiet. No rain, no wind, no refrigerator hum from downstairs. Then, from outside, I heard 3 soft taps. Not at the window, farther away. Maybe from the woods, maybe from the wall, maybe from my own half-asleep head. Tap, 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 a pause. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up and listened. The sound did not come again. After maybe 10 seconds, the rain returned all at once, like someone had turned it back on. In the morning, Luke said the power had flickered at 4:17. He knew because the microwave clock was blinking when he got up. Marin said her phone had been dead, even though it had been charging. Mine had dropped from 62% to 9 overnight. I didn't mention the tapping because I didn't want to sound like I was trying to make the trail camera thing bigger than it was. After breakfast, I went back out to pull the north camera. The rain had stopped, but the forest was soaked. Water dripped from every branch. The old logging road was soft and printed with deer tracks, raccoon tracks, and my own boot prints from the evening before. The air was cool and still. When I got to the fir tree, the camera was facing the ground again. The strap was tight now. That stopped me before I touched it. The camera had sagged again, but the strap had no slack in it. It looked like the whole unit had been bent downward from the mount, except the plastic bracket wasn't broken. It had warped slightly, softened maybe, and set at a new angle. I took photos with my phone. Then I looked at the tree. The bark around the camera had 3 clean round marks in the moss, each about the size of a quarter, arranged in a triangle. They were not scratches. They were clean spots, as if something warm had pressed there and cleared the damp green film away. I touched one. It was warm, not sun warm. The whole area was shaded and wet. The mark held a steady heat under my finger. I stepped back. That was when I noticed the ground in front of the camera. The logging road there had dried in a perfect oval. Everything else was wet mud. The ferns dripped. The tree roots were slick. My boots sank and made